Chapter 127. The spirit-binding array that had existed for hundreds of years was suddenly activated. Wave after wave of heaven and earth spirit qi surged, giving Chunxi an illusion. It was as if he had returned to the Tianxian domain. The surging heaven and earth spirit qi created an extremely comfortable environment for him, so comfortable that all the pores on his body could not help but open up naturally. He really needed the nourishment of heaven and earth spirit qi. Now every breath he took was a great pleasure for Chunxi. The spirit qi surged, and the golden light soared into the sky. When the so-called divine general walked out of the pillar of light, Chunxi finally understood the meaning of the existence of this array. This spirit-binding array was actually the last trump card of the village, the divine general of the Elysium. The accumulation of hundreds of years of the array was only in exchange for the time it took for the divine general to appear. When Chunxi killed great-granduncle and took Qin Ruoying away, they did not activate the array. Now that he came back to ask for the ghost, these old guys finally chose to activate the array and tried to fight to the death with Chunxi. It could be seen that Xian Nu's ghost was more important to them than their own lives. Chunxi looked up at the burly man flying in the sky. A long sword of frost suddenly appeared in his hand. The old guys at least had the chance to struggle and hesitate, but he did not, because he was faced with only one choice: take back Yingying's ghost. Otherwise, when Qin Ruoying gradually grew old in his arms, Chunxi would also fall into endless pain and regret. He could not accept the arrival of that day. Therefore, then let's fight. If they were not willing to give, then let's fight. Chunxi was determined to kill. And the long sword of frost immediately glowed faintly. Then, under the slightly surprised gaze of the divine general, he suddenly waved the long sword in his hand. The tip of the sword went from bottom to top, drawing an arc in the air. A sword radiance suddenly flew out. Seeing that Chunxi dared to suddenly attack him, the divine general's eyes flashed with surprise. The sword radiance came menacingly, and in an instant, it was in front of him. He did not seem to move, but a ball of blazing flames suddenly sprang up around the divine general. A barrier of stellar energy that seemed to be made of flames instantly formed. Bang! The sword radiance slammed into the flame barrier, like a typhoon erupting, and a storm of qi soared into the sky. But right after that, the flame barrier suddenly expanded. Then, a huge fireball with a diameter of more than 10 meters appeared in the air. Interesting. Accompanied by a burst of laughter, the divine general's figure suddenly flew out of the fireball. He suddenly stretched out his right hand and formed a claw with his 5 fingers. He clawed at the air and a golden fireball appeared in his palm. After the golden fireball appeared, the divine general's body seemed to be on fire. Golden flames kept jumping around him. Like the sun rising from the east, the golden fireball instantly ignited all the air within a radius of dozens of meters. The sun hung in the sky, the fire burning the sky. Chunxi stared intently at the tall and sturdy man in the sky, a trace of excitement rising in her heart. This move made him feel a hint of danger. The divine general seemed to be holding the sun in his hand, his body burning with raging flames. Like a meteor falling from the sky, he cut across the sky and smashed viciously toward Chunxi, who was standing on the ground. At this critical moment, Chunxi swung the sword in his hand, and in an instant, tens of thousands of sword radiances appeared. Countless long swords made of frost and snow appeared around him. They floated in the air, quietly waiting for orders. Chunxi pointed his sword to the sky, and the floating swords immediately turned their tips and aimed at the fireball in the sky. The third move of the moonlight sword technique. 10,000 swords returned to the sect. The densely packed long swords of frost and snow instantly converged into a long river of sword radiances, like the Milky Way flowing in reverse, and collided with the fireball in midair. The entire sky was instantly divided into 2 worlds. On one side of the divine general of the stellar of time, flames and snakes of fire danced in the sky. It was as if one was above the sun, the crown flow feathers shining brightly. On the other side of Chunxi, wind and clouds surged, snow and ice splattered everywhere, as if one was caught in the most violent snowstorm of the North Pole. The two of them seemed to be separated by an invisible and boundless glass wall. In one world, there were 2 kinds of wonders. It was truly amazing. Boom. The moment the sword radiances met the fireball, it was as if a nuclear bomb had exploded. A strong shockwave suddenly erupted, and the old man closest to them was immediately sent flying by the violent strength chi. Such a violent shockwave instantly turned all the houses around the square into ruins. Fortunately, most of the people in the village were not ordinary people, and those who dared to come close to watch the battle were experts of a certain level of strength. But even so, the aftermath of the battle still caused them serious internal injuries. It was too terrifying. Just the aftermath of the battle between the two of them could cause such a huge amount of damage. Was he still human? Zhao Xinghuai lay on the ground, trembling. Suddenly, he came to his senses and quickly stood up, clutching his chest in pain. Then he pulled Li Hoan up, turned around, and shouted to the crowd behind him. "Everyone run! Leave the village! The farther the better!" The crowd of onlookers fled in all directions. A battle of this level was no longer something they could watch. On the square, the shock wave caused by the battle between the two of them finally subsided. The square, which was originally the size of 2 basketball courts, seemed to have been hit by a huge invisible iron ball. With Chunxi as the center, a huge circular crater appeared on the ground of the square. The deepest part of the crater was at least 5 meters deep. Chunxi floated in the middle of the crater, facing the divine general of the stellar of time in the sky. After this collision, they had more or less figured out each other's strength, so they did not intend to attack immediately. The divine general looked at Chunxi thoughtfully, then suddenly laughed. "Your cultivation is not very high, but the move you used just now was really powerful." From the looks of it, he seemed to be very interested in the sword art that Chunxi had just used. "Is that so?" Chunxi raised her eyelids and looked at the tall and sturdy man. She couldn't help but sneer. The divine general in front of him was not an immortal cultivator, but after exchanging blows with him, Chunxi could roughly estimate his strength. Above Yuanying and below soul formation. What about himself? In fact, he was now like a sorcerer without mana. He still had his realm, but his accumulation of vital energy was far from enough. When the array was activated just now, Chunxi took the opportunity to absorb a wave of spiritual energy from heaven and earth, which allowed him to successfully use the third move of the Moonlight Sword technique. 10,000 swords returned to origin. Chunxi floated above the crater, holding the long sword silently, as if he was thinking about something. The divine general did not seem to be in a hurry, because the person in front of him had indeed piqued his interest. After a while. Chapter 128. Wasting time? He was probably stalling for time. After hearing the elder's words, the immortal general lowered his head and looked at Chunxi with a faint smile. He thought for a moment and suddenly spread his hands. Following that, 2 golden fireballs leaped up from his palms. "I'm very interested in the sword technique you used just now. If you give it to me, I promise I won't attack again." He was very interested in Chunxi's sword technique. The expressions of the few old men who were hiding nearby changed drastically when they heard his words. If the immortal general didn't attack, then after he left, that young man would probably massacre the entire village. If they had known this would happen, they would have just returned the Yin soul to him. Chunxi held his sword and floated above the giant pit. He lowered his head and didn't say a word. No one knew what he was thinking. After hearing the immortal general's words, Chunxi looked up at him. It seemed that he didn't like the feeling of looking up at others. So Chunxi flew up until he reached the same height as the immortal general. Then he said calmly, "You want my sword technique? You have good taste." The Moonlight Sword technique was comparable to the 49 forms of heaven's divination. There were only 3 forms, but the power of these 3 forms would increase as the user's realm increased. Gold will always shine. Your cultivation isn't high enough, so you won't be able to use the true power of this sword technique. Why don't you give it to me? What do you think? The immortal general smiled. As he spoke, he looked at the 2 golden fireballs in his palms. The golden fireballs kept jumping, as if they were silently threatening him. "I might not be able to kill you in 30 minutes, but I don't think it'll be a big problem if I want to seriously injure you." The immortal general was very confident, as if he had Chunxi under control. Hearing this, Chunxi couldn't help but laugh. This sword technique is called the Moonlight Sword technique. It's of the yin attribute. It might conflict with your fire attribute technique. That's not important. No one will complain about having too many techniques. The Immortal General said indifferently. However, Chunxi's next word stunned him. I have a set of saber techniques that are comparable to a sword technique. It's of the yang attribute. I think it'll be compatible with your technique. As soon as he finished speaking, Chunxi gently raised his left hand. Then a gust of wind suddenly blew in the deep pit below him. A small tornado suddenly rose from the bottom of the pit. Then, it wrapped the dust and gravel on the ground and flew directly toward Chunxi's left hand. In the blink of an eye, a long saber made of dust suddenly appeared in his hand. After the dust blade was formed, it immediately formed a sharp contrast with the frost sword in his right hand. The saber was yellow, but the sword was clear and bright. Dust was the knife, frost and snow were the sword. He wanted to kill everyone in the world. The Immortal General was stunned for a moment. Then he suddenly laughed wildly. Saber and sword mastery? Interesting. Then let me see if your saber is worthy of your sword. With that, the Divine General clasped his hands together. The two sun-like blazing fireballs immediately merged into one, erupting with a powerful shockwave. An incomparably dazzling golden light suddenly exploded from his palm, illuminating the entire sky in a deathly white. The extreme of yang fire, burning the sky and boiling the sea. While the Immortal General was practicing, Chunxi was not idle. The frost sword in his right hand suddenly glowed with a faint cold light, and the dust blade in his left hand shone with a little yellow light. Moonlight sword technique, red sun saber technique. The saber and the sword merged. The saber cut the wind, the sword cut the clouds, and the wind and clouds were disturbed. As soon as this move was made, the world suddenly changed color. There seemed to be a wave of saber and sword behind Chunxi. The invisible wind and visible clouds in the sky strangely disappeared at the moment when the saber and sword came out together. The saber and sword were annihilated, and the wind and clouds changed color. With Chunxi as the center, there seemed to be a vacuum zone within 100 feet. All the wind, clouds, dust, and even the spiritual chi of heaven and earth were expelled from the battlefield by him. Then he slashed the saber and sword in his hand toward the Immortal General. In the courtyard, after watching an episode of cartoons, the little fellow sat on the bed and shouted, "Papa? Papa, I want to pee." She was very clingy. She knew how to go to the bathroom by herself, but she just didn't want to go alone. The little fellow shouted for a while. Her father, who used to respond to her calls, didn't come today. She pouted and was obviously a little unhappy, so she immediately lay on the bed and rolled. "Papa, Papa, Papa, where did you go?" After all, Qin Ruoying was just a mortal, so she didn't have the 5 senses as sharp as Chunxi's. She was still standing in the yard in a daze. Although Chunxi could even kill great-granduncle with one sword, Qin Ruoying had a faint unjustified worry after he left this time. She hadn't seen Chunxi for 5 years, and she was really afraid to be separated from him again. Papa was not here, and Mama didn't hear it. When the big cat saw that the little one was making a scene, it immediately jumped out of the bed and ran to Qin Ruoying's side. Then it rubbed its body against her feet. Meow. The big cat called Qin Ruoying back from her chaotic thoughts. As soon as she saw the big cat, she knew that something must have happened to Nian Nian, so she ran to the west wing. Sure enough, before she stepped into the room, she had already heard the little fellow shouting for Papa. Children were always clingy, so sometimes when their mother was not around, they would start to look for their mother inexplicably when they went to the bathroom or went out to throw away the garbage. Once their mother didn't appear in time, then sorry. If it was light, they would be easily angry, and if it was heavy, they would cry, and it was very difficult to coax them. Qin Ruoying still spent too little time with the little fellow, so once the little fellow had anything, the first reaction was to look for her father, not her mother. She quickly sat beside the little fellow, gently helped her up, and then asked worriedly, "Nian Nian, what's wrong?" "I want to pee." The little fellow pouted and said very discontentedly, "Then Mama will take you, okay?" As she said, Qin Ruoying reached out to pick up the little fellow. However, the little fellow pushed her away. "No, I want Papa. I want Papa." As she said, the little fellow suddenly pouted and cried, "I want Papa." The more she said, the more upset she became, and bean-sized tears suddenly fell from the corners of her eyes. Qin Ruoying was a little at a loss, and could only softly comfort her. "Papa went out to buy something, and will be back soon. If you want to pee, Mama will go with you, okay?" "No. I want Papa." The little fellow sat on the bed. Her little hands kept patting the bed, and her two legs kicked the bed at random. Looking at her like this, she was on the verge of exploding. Seeing her like this, Qin Ruoying suddenly looked a little embarrassed. After hesitating for a moment, she tentatively reached out her hand again. The little fellow did not refuse, and Qin Ruoying finally took her in her arms. "Nian, Papa went out to buy something, and he will be back soon. Nian, don't cry. Mama will be with you, okay?" "No. Papa said that he will never leave me. I want Papa. I want Papa." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying trembled all over, and could not help but cry. At this moment, she suddenly remembered the time when Nian was just born. At that time, the little fellow was still a cute baby. As long as she was not held for a while, she would cry loudly. Whenever little Nian cried, Qin Ruoying would hold her in her arms in a panic. Shaking and shaking, it would take a long time for little Nian to stop crying and giggle. So what she was most afraid of at that time was that the little fellow would cry. Time flew, and the child had grown so big. Chapter 129. Qin Ruoying held the little girl in her arms. All of a sudden, she seemed to realize something. When she left Nian was still young, so she had no impression of her. Although Chunxi came back later, he had been with the little girl since he came back. With his meticulous care and love, Chunxi succeeded in occupying more and more weight in the little girl's heart. He had surpassed her mother and Aunt Zhang. Therefore, the little girl only needed her father now. Her father was her whole world. The intimacy between the father and daughter at any time made Qin Ruoying feel very lost. Father, mother, child. They were supposed to be a close family of three. But because of the short separation before, there was a faint sense of alienation between them. The reason why Qin Ruoying felt alienated from Nian was that she hadn't realized how she should integrate into the family. Because of Nian's birth, the simple two-person world between her and Chunxi had completely turned into a brand new three-person world. As the father and mother, they had never appeared by the little girl's side at the same time. With the reunion of the family, when Chunxi showed great strength and confidence, Qin Ruoying was lost. It was a feeling that could make any woman lose herself. At the same time, it was also called a sense of security. Therefore, she felt extremely worried when Chunxi just left for a while. Just like Nian, she had to look for her father when she went to the toilet. Compared to her daughter, how much better was she? The mother and daughter were too dependent on Chunxi. He was the perfect husband and the perfect father. She, on the other hand, was just an unqualified mother. Thinking of this, Qin Ruoying suddenly stopped crying. After wiping her eyes without leaving a trace, she let go of the little girl and carefully wiped her tears. "Nian, don't cry. Daddy didn't leave you. He just went to buy groceries. He'll be back soon to cook for you. Don't you like Daddy's cooking the most? What do you want to eat tonight?" "I don't want to eat, I want Daddy." The little guy kicked the bed, still throwing a tantrum. Qin Ruoying had no choice but to hug her gently and keep trying to reason with her. After a long while, after the little girl calmed down a little, Qin Ruoying immediately picked her up and carried her to the bathroom. "Let's go. Don't you want to pee? Mama will take you there. Be careful not to wet the bed again." Hearing this, the little guy was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He immediately pouted and shouted softly, "I don't wet the bed." In the past life and in this life, the two looked at each other. The sword and the sword were used to cut off their worries. "I walk alone in the heavens and under the earth. I am duty-bound and crazy for love." This set of sword and saber techniques didn't originate from the heavenly Yen divine sect. Instead, it was an ancient inheritance that Chunxi obtained by chance. The Dark Heaven Evil Emperor. The third form of the saber, the third form of the sword. The third form of sword and saber. 3 by 3 is inexhaustible, 9 by 9 returns to 1. The saber cut the wind, the sword cut the clouds, and the wind and clouds were disturbed. Although it was a divine skill, it didn't change the fact that Chunxi's cultivation had been damaged. Chunxi, who was seriously injured, faced the divine general who was in his peak state. The divine general held the golden crow in his hand. It was like the sun had descended to earth. Thousands of golden pillars of fire swore to burn everything in the world to ashes. Chunxi's face was as calm as water. After the sword and saber slashed out, two huge shadows appeared in the sky. A saber and a sword instantly collided with the scorching fireball. When the saber and sword shadows collided with the raging flames in the sky, the entire world shook. The shockwave that shot out in all directions instantly dimmed the 5 golden pillars. The huge cloud vortex in the sky also trembled, almost being torn apart by the violent strength chi and vanishing into thin air. The spirit-binding array was on the verge of collapse. A few elders hid behind the hill behind the ancestral hall. After the wind and smoke dissipated, they cautiously poked their heads out. The scene in front of them completely stunned them. Annihilation. Everything was annihilated. This village with a long history was instantly razed to the ground by such a violent collision. When the smoke and dust dissipated, a huge circular crater with a diameter of hundreds of meters appeared below the two of them. The land was originally flat, the houses were neat, and there were fertile fields, beautiful ponds, mulberry trees, and other plants. It was a paradise where chickens and dogs could hear each other. Now, it was completely gone. Even the small hill that they were hiding in had been cut in half. The divine general was still floating in the air. He wasn't wearing a shirt, revealing his strong muscles. The flames that kept rising around him like flames had already disappeared. There were no scars on his bronze-colored skin. But then, the divine general was like a broken showerhead. Tiny flowers of blood splattered all over his body. Not long after, his entire body was dyed red with blood. Chunxi held the saber in his left hand and the sword in his right, as if he had never moved. But if one looked closely, they would find that Chunxi was in a very strange state. His eyes were empty, as if he had lost his soul. The saber and sword were still in his hands, but there was a faint blood-red light around him. The confidence and wild laughter on the divine general's face had disappeared, leaving only fear. Yes, he was scared. Because his injuries were too serious, he couldn't even maintain flying. So the divine general immediately made a wise decision. Run. However, the moment he turned around, the blood-red light behind him lit up. The blood-red light that was as delicate and beautiful as fresh blood instantly dyed the entire sky red. The pillar of light that pierced through the clouds disappeared. The cloud vortex dissipated. The tortoiseshell-like golden barrier slowly turned into white smoke and disappeared. The wind and snow were still in the sky. The cold wind whistled through the sky with snowflakes. It was as if summer had turned to winter in an instant. A blood-red sword light suddenly slashed out. Bang! The hillside where the elders were hiding was immediately razed to the ground. Where is the soul of Xian Nu? The cold and emotionless voice suddenly sounded in the sky. Hearing this, the leading old man immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed heavily. Then he tremblingly took out a black box and shouted, "The soul of the mysterious fairy is here. If I may be so bold, please spare our lives, immortal master." He knelt on the ground and held the box tightly with both hands, as if he was begging for mercy. This box was their only chance to live. If that man didn't agree, then they could only destroy this box. They would fight to the death. However, just as the old man was about to say something, a long sword of frost and snow suddenly formed in the sky above his head. Then a blood-red sword light suddenly fell. Thud! The box fell to the ground and rolled a few times before lying down quietly in the mud. Chunxi casually waved his hand. The box seemed to have sensed something. After trembling slightly, it suddenly flew into his hand. After getting the box, Chunxi glanced around indifferently. The village had been reduced to nothing. The villagers had also retreated to the edge of the array. Everyone huddled together and trembled as they looked at the godlike man in the sky. He thought for a moment, then turned around and flew in the direction he came from. However, the moment he turned around and flew away, 6 blood-red sword lights suddenly appeared in the sky. Chapter 130. In the courtyard. Qin Ruoying took the little fellow to the bathroom and wiped her face with a hot towel. The little fellow stopped crying at this time. She stood on the ground with her mouth pursed and her face full of grievance, but she looked very cute. Because she had just washed her face, the little fellow's little face was red, like a ripe red apple. Qin Ruoying could not help but reach out and gently pinch her pink little face. "I want to pee." As if to show her independence, the little fellow quickly ran to the side of the toilet and sat on it by herself. It was the first time Qin Ruoying saw her daughter go to the bathroom, and she could not help but feel a little strange. However, she was worried that the little fellow would fall, so she quickly walked over and gently held her. After going to the bathroom, the little fellow did not want Qin Ruoying to hold her, and ran out without washing her hands. Qin Ruoying quickly followed behind her and found that she wanted to open the door and go out. So she quickly stopped her and asked nervously, "Nian Nian, where are you going?" She was afraid that the little fellow would run out to find her father. However, the little fellow did not seem to have that idea, but pouted and replied, "Papa said that after watching an episode of cartoons, we should go out and exercise. I want to exercise." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying could only smile bitterly and open the door for her. This child, 3 sentences without leaving her father's side, did not consider her mother's feelings. A gust of cold wind suddenly blew in when the door opened. The little fellow shivered, but did not shrink back. Instead, she shouted loudly, "Big cat! Big cat! Let's go play in the yard!" Meow. The big cat lay at the foot of the bed, seemingly unwilling to move. Seeing this, the little fellow was immediately unhappy. She quickly ran to the side of the bed and pressed down on the big cat. Then, she took it into her arms and carried it out of the west wing. "Papa said that you have to play with me." Meow. Although the big cat was a monster, it still had the nature of an animal, so when winter came, it was lazy and did not want to move much. However, since the little fellow said so, it had to obediently accompany her. The inner courtyard had been completely destroyed by Chun Shi, and there was a big hole in the middle. Qin Ruoying was afraid that she would run into the hole and fall, so she quickly said, "Nian Nian, just play on the steps." "What do you want to play?" "Mommy can play with you." The little fellow put the big cat, and seemed to think that there was no way to play in the yard, so she could not help but wrinkle her little face, as if she was thinking about what she should play. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying immediately racked her brains to think of something. What to play? She had to say, as a mother's motheress therefore, it was best to take this opportunity to cultivate a good relationship with the little fellow. Qin Ruoying thought for a while, and then suddenly came up with a wonderful idea, so she immediately said to the little fellow, "Nian Nian, Mommy will play hide and seek with you, how about it?" Hide and seek? The little fellow was stunned for a moment, and then jumped up happily. She was so happy that she clapped her hands and shouted, "Okay, I want to play hide and seek." She had been yearning for hide and seek for a long time. It was just that she used to live in the Kangju district, and that house was too small, so she could not play. Aunt Zhang did not like her to run around in the district, so she had never allowed her to play hide and seek with other children. Therefore, when Qin Ruoying proposed this idea, the little fellow was immediately excited. The courtyard was so big, and there were so many rooms. It was perfect for playing hide and seek. The mother and daughter quickly reached a consensus. Qin Ruoying found, and the little fellow hid. After the discussion, Qin Ruoying leaned against the wall and loudly chanted the 30-second countdown. Hearing her countdown, the little fellow, who was still giggling, immediately panicked. She looked around for a while, then suddenly jumped into the west wing, and then hurriedly hid in the closet. The west wing was the place she was most familiar with, so her first reaction was to go back to the room. This was the first time she played hide and seek, so she did not have much experience, so she made a lot of noise. After Qin Ruoying finished counting down, she walked into the room with a faint smile. After looking around, she knew that the little fellow must have hidden in the closet. "Nian Nian, where did you hide? Mommy can't find you." She pretended to wander around the room. The little fellow covered her mouth with both hands and nervously hid in the closet. She didn't even dare to breathe. Qin Ruoying counted the time. About 2 minutes later, she approached the wardrobe as she spoke. Because she was afraid of scaring the little fellow, She paused outside the closet for a while, and then slowly opened the closet door. Found you. Mommy, you're amazing. Seeing Qin Ruoying open the wardrobe door, the little girl didn't hide anymore. She immediately jumped into Qin Ruoying's arms and giggled. How is it? Is it fun? It's fun. I want to play more. Well, I'll give you another chance. This time you have to hide better, okay? The little guy nodded his head heavily. Looking at her excited little face, she had probably long forgotten about her father. If you want to get along with children happily, you have to have 3 hearts: patience, love, and consideration. What's more, Nian was Qin Ruoying's favorite. Therefore, after she adjusted her state of mind, she immediately played with the little fellow. With her mother's company, time passed quickly. When Qin Ruoying found the little fellow for the 5th time, Chunxi finally came back. Like a gust of wind, he appeared in the courtyard without a sound. Qin Ruoying followed the little fellow. As soon as she walked out of the room, she saw Chunxi. She froze for a moment, but the little fellow had already rushed to Chunxi shouting, "Papa!" Chunxi was afraid that she would slip, so he quickly stepped forward and picked her up. What's wrong? What are you playing? Hide and seek. Mommy, play hide and seek with me. Is it fun? It's fun. Qin Ruoying looked at Chunxi in a daze. Chunxi was playing with the little fellow in his arms, as if there was nothing strange. What else did he want to hide? But could he hide it? Perhaps seeing the worry in Qin Ruoying's eyes, Chunxi put the little fellow down with a smile, then touched her head and said with a smile, Nian, it's cold outside. Go back to the room first. Okay. Seeing that her father was back, the little fellow was relieved, so she ran back to the room happily. After the little fellow left, Qin Ruoying finally couldn't help but grab Chunxi's arm and ask anxiously, Are you hurt? Where is the injury? Is it serious? As she spoke, she looked up and down at Chunxi nervously. Chunxi had no trace of injury. However, his face was devoid of any color, and his lips were deathly pale. He looked like a patient who had lost too much blood. I'm fine, don't worry. Chapter 131. Chunxi handed the box to Qin Ruoying as if she was presenting a treasure. She thought that Qin Ruoying would be very happy, but she didn't expect that after seeing the box, Qin Ruoying had a complicated expression on her face. Chunxi didn't understand, so he asked in confusion, Ying, what's wrong? Are you unhappy? Qin Ruoying didn't say anything, but her expression was also complicated. Chunxi thought she didn't understand the importance of this, so he explained, The reason you can't sense qi is because when you became Xian, they extracted your earthly soul. A person has 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. Without 1 spiritual soul, you can't be considered a complete person. It's because of this that you can't cultivate. Before Chunxi could finish, Qin Ruoying suddenly interrupted him. I can choose not to cultivate. With that, Qin Ruoying hurriedly took Chunxi's hand and sighed softly. Do you know what my wish was when I was 8 years old? The wish you made when you became Xian? Yes, Xian can make a wish. I didn't have the same ambition as Yuan Qing back then, so my wish was very simple. I only wanted to live a peaceful and happy life like a normal person. When she said this, Chunxi suddenly understood something. He looked at Qin Ruoying's serious expression, and couldn't help but gently pull her into his arms. Then he said solemnly to her, I'm sorry, Ying, I made you worry. Chunxi hadn't been injured in the battle with the Divine General. However, he had paid a heavy price because of this. Because he had burned another drop of essence blood. Essence blood, the essence of blood, was also the life source of a cultivator. Essence blood contained enormous energy. Many demonic and evil techniques even relied on stealing the essence blood of others to increase their own cultivation. Chunxi used a secret technique to burn his essence blood, allowing himself to explode with power close to his peak for a short period of time. This allowed him to successfully kill the Divine General, who was comparable to a complete Yuanying. Essence blood wasn't present at birth, but gradually condensed as a cultivator's cultivation grew. After 500 years of accumulation, Chunxi had actually only accumulated 3 drops of essence blood. Before returning to Earth, he had already burned a drop because he didn't have enough vital essence. The divine general had burned another drop. Therefore, he only had 1 drop of essence blood left. If he lost even this drop of essence blood, Chunshi wouldn't be far from death. Regret? Absolutely not. Even if I die, my heart won't be covered in dust. Qin Ruoying looked at Chunshi's slightly pale face and couldn't help but reach out to touch it. After feeling the warmth from his face, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but murmur, "Maybe it's because of Xian Nu's identity that I've basically fulfilled all the wishes I've made before. Just think of it as greed. So I have a new wish." Speaking of this, Qin Ruoying suddenly laughed, then turned to look at the room. At this time, the little girl's giggles sounded in the room. Silly child. Watching cartoons alone can make you convulse with laughter. After the Earth Soul returned to its original position, Qin Xueqing really found the sense of qi. That kind of mysterious feeling made her, a martial arts fanatic, immediately intoxicated. Faintly, she even had an illusion. The long-sealed gate of the Alcade state seemed to finally show a sign of loosening. She could finally step into the Alcade state? Qin Wanqing was still struggling to break through to the Alcade realm. Qin Yongyan, on the other hand, started cultivating a few days earlier than her, and took the spirit gathering pill. Therefore, he smoothly stepped into the early stage of qi refinement, and directly stepped into the Alcade realm. He was now a grandmaster of the Alcade state. This also made him more convinced that what Chunshi taught them was much more powerful than martial arts. His father-in-law and sister-in-law were both obsessed with cultivation, so they didn't even come out for dinner. Chunshi didn't want to interrupt this kind of state where they forgot to eat and sleep, so he left some food in the refrigerator for them. After dinner, Chunshi wanted Qin Ruoying to also cultivate. But at this time, Qin Ruoying shook her head and proposed to take a walk in Hohai. Take a walk? The little girl was lying on the bed. After hearing her mother's suggestion, she immediately raised her hands and feet, expressing her absolute approval. Being cooped up at home every day, this little girl was about to become moldy. In winter, the sun set early. It wasn't even 7 o'clock in the evening, but some places without street lights were already pitch black. Outside the big house, one could see the old street light at the entrance of Dongming Alley. The light of the street light was slightly yellow, elongating the shadows of the family of 3. The little girl held Qin Ruoying's left hand and Chunshi's right hand. She squatted on the snow, and her 2 small cotton boots seemed to have turned into skis, constantly yelling for them to run. Just like the sleigh pulling the carriage at Christmas, her parents were the elk pulling the carriage. And she was Santa Claus bringing joy to the mortal world. Since their daughter had this request, her parents had to agree even if they had to work like cows or horses. Thus, Qin Ruoying and Chunshi looked at each other and smiled, and immediately pulled her to a trot. Giddy up. Horse run. Horse run. The sleigh started running, and the little girl's 2 feet immediately pulled a long track on the ground. She was so happy that she giggled, feeling that it seemed to be more interesting than riding a big cat. Qin Ruoying's physical fitness was average. In winter, she wore a lot of clothes, and the snow was difficult to walk on, so after running for a while, she was tired and panting. And because she was so happy, she kept laughing. The intense exercise and the stimulation of the cold air immediately caused a sharp pain in her abdomen. Exercise-induced abdominal pain. Ouch! Qin Ruoying gasped for air as she clutched her stomach and groaned. Seeing this, Chunshi quickly stopped. Chunshi used his true essence to help her recuperate. After seeing that she was better, Chunshi said to the little girl, "Mommy's body isn't good. Nian Nian, come, Daddy will play with you. Today, I'll let you experience what it means to be fast and furious." Okay. After Qin Ruoying stopped, the little girl sat down on the ground. Hearing Chunshi's words, she immediately stretched out her hands and took Chunshi's right hand. "Little princess, let's go." After that, Chunshi started running. In this kind of snow, they couldn't run too fast. If the little girl couldn't control herself, she would be dragged to the ground by Chunshi. Therefore, Chunshi could only pay attention to the little girl's state while slowly speeding up. In fact, the speed was not very fast, but the little girl was very excited. She happily giggled and said, "Papa, come on! Papa, come on!" It was really much more fun than riding a big cat. Hohai had not completely frozen, and the skating rink had not been opened, so now Shikahai looked a little deserted. The weather was still too cold, so the family of 3 returned home after a round. In the evening, after the little girl fell asleep, Qin Ruoying finally began to cultivate. She had figured it out. If she neglected her daughter because of cultivation, then she was not worthy of being Nianyan's mother. In a dark room, the little girl fell asleep sweetly, while Chunxi and Qin Ruoying sat cross-legged on her left and right. Suddenly, Chunxi opened his eyes. Chapter 132. Outside the house, the cold wind was whistling. The big pit that Chunxi had stepped on had been covered with a shallow layer of snow. The bluestone floor was broken into pieces, protruding in the east and concave in the west. There were thousands of gullies, and if one was not careful, one would slide down. Seeing that the little fellow's activity area was suddenly missing such a large area because of him, Chunxi thought that he should find someone to repair it tomorrow, so that the little fellow could continue to gallop in the yard. Perhaps he could also buy her a set of children's outdoor expansion equipment? Just like the large-scale expansion equipment in the shopping mall, there were tire arrays, rock climbing, balance boards, ring bridges, scaling ladders, and so on. It was very playable, and could also be used to train the little fellow's balance, athletic ability, coordination ability, and many other aspects. Chunxi did not consider letting the little fellow cultivate for the time being. That was because Nianyan still had to go to school in the future. At that time, she would definitely play with other children in school. If she lost control a little and slapped other children, it would be troublesome. Therefore, it would not be too late to teach her cultivation when she was a little more sensible. While thinking, Chunxi flew out of the yard. He wanted to go out and find another place to cultivate. Although the spiritual energy of heaven and earth near Shikahai was very rich, now his wife, sister-in-law, and father-in-law were all cultivating here. The cultivation of the 3 of them was still shallow, so it didn't matter if they were crowded together. However, Chunxi's cultivation was too high, so he must not stay with them. Because once he started cultivating, he would immediately form a spiritual energy black hole in the courtyard, sucking all the spiritual energy of heaven and earth nearby into his body. How could others cultivate like this? Therefore, Chunxi could only come out and find another place. Since returning to earth, Chunxi had never deliberately wanted to cultivate. The reason why he changed his mind now was that after the battle with the Divine General, he suddenly had a sense of crisis. If he began to wholeheartedly restore his cultivation after returning to earth, why would he waste a drop of blood essence today? Strength was the basic guarantee of a happy life. In order to make his happy life last longer, Chunxi decided to start cultivating seriously. In the past, he had nothing to live for, but now he was full of happiness, so his fighting spirit was high. If he wanted to cultivate, he had to first find a suitable blessed enclave. Blessed enclaves were usually located in places where there were very few people. For example, in the mountains and on the islands, it was very easy for blessed lands to appear. The so-called blessed enclave was actually a place with dense heaven and earth spirit qi. As the capital of the country, Shangjing's geographical location was excellent. It was located at the intersection of the plains and the mountains. The steep mountains, the rushing rivers, and the fertile plains were all in one place. It was a treasure trove of wind and water. It was also the best place to build the capital. There were 2 mountain ranges in the vicinity. The Taihang mountain range ran from the north to the south, and was majestic. The Yen mountain range ran from the west to the east, and was vast and boundless. To the west was Taihang mountain, and to the north was Mount Yen. Mount Yen was still a bit small and not grand enough, so Chunxi thought for a moment, and directly eliminated Mount Yen. Now that the tourism industry was developed, places with slightly better scenery were all listed as scenic spots. It was estimated that when the big cat was looking for a place to cultivate, it also took a lot of effort to find Mount Ame. Chunxi flew and searched. It wasn't until he flew over the Spirit Mountain in the western suburbs of Shangjing that he finally found a remote place with dense heaven and earth spirit qi. This mountain range was steep, and it was estimated to be more than 2,000 meters above sea level. The top of the mountain was already covered with a thick layer of snow. Standing on the top of the mountain, when the clouds surged, the clouds paved a road, and people walked in the sky. It was like a fairyland. Chunshi looked around, and after confirming that there was no one else around, he sat cross-legged on a large rock at the top of the mountain and began cultivating. As he gradually entered the state, Chunshi's body seemed to turn into a black hole, and the surrounding heaven and earth spirit chi rushed towards him. Within a radius of tens of meters, there was strangely no wind, like a color photo, and everything seemed to be still. On the top of the snowy mountain, a bright moon hung in the sky, and the surrounding stars were overshadowed. Time flew. When Chunshi opened his eyes again, the sun on the horizon just happened to show a corner of the clouds. Thousands of clusters of golden arrows burst out from the clouds and reflected on his body, as if covering him with a golden gauze. Cultivation was dry and boring to begin with, because it was a process that accumulated over time. Chunshi was not in a hurry. After seeing the sun rise, he immediately got up and left the top of the mountain, because he had to go back to prepare breakfast for the little fellow. Qin Ruoying now also made up her mind to accompany Niannian during the day and find time to cultivate at night. She wanted to let the little fellow deeply feel what was called motherly love. Of course, this kind of love was not without limits. Appropriate love was called doting. Once it went beyond the limit, it became doting. To any child, being spoiled was definitely not beneficial. Qin Ruoying also put in a lot of effort. Although she had only been with Niannian for a few days, she was very keen to find a problem that had not yet occurred. Niannian was very smart and sensible, and she rarely lost her temper. Although sometimes she also liked to make trouble, more often than not, Niannian liked to quietly watch cartoons with the big cat. Niannian never seemed to be very interested in the outside world. Playing games with her parents, watching cartoons with the big cat. This was all the content of her life. This way of life was absolutely wrong, because she lacked communication with her peers, and also relatively lacked the psychological and ability to socialize. Although the big cat was a monster, and its intelligence was far superior to that of a child, it could not speak, so there was no way to communicate with the little fellow. If the child had too little contact with the outside world from a young age, it may lead to an extremely serious consequence. That was when the child grew up, he or she would become more and more withdrawn. If it was more serious, it would even evolve into a psychological illness, such as low self-esteem, autism, depression, and so on. As a parent, in the child's growth process, it was obvious that they should take the initiative to create opportunities for the child to interact with strangers and unfamiliar environments, to increase the child's ability to socialize and adapt to the environment, and to cultivate a cheerful and optimistic character. Qin Ruoying looked at the little fellow who immediately climbed into bed after breakfast. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that something was wrong. So she quickly told this problem to Chunshi. And when Chunshi heard what she said, he immediately realized the seriousness of the situation. After all, Aunt Zhang was old and in poor health, so she rarely took Niannian out to play with other children. And after he came back, it seemed that he did not take Niannian to play with other children. At most, he let the little fellow go to kindergarten, but after a few days he did not go. No. According to this progress, it seemed that Niannian was likely to become more and more withdrawn. She looked very outgoing now, but that was because she stayed by her parents' side all day long. She could not be so introverted in front of her parents, right? What to do? Chapter 133. Walking side by side with me is obviously a tough task for a loner like him. The man in the condom. Humans were social creatures. Some Western scholars even categorized loners who do not socialize with others as antisocial personalities, because this in itself was a sign of morbidity. Being antisocial was different from being alone. Lonely people yearned to socialize with others. They would not be bored with anyone, and they would not even be on guard against everyone. Antisocial people were a kind of personality defect. They usually thought highly of themselves and looked down on others, but their hearts were extremely weak. They were afraid of being stabbed, so they did not want to socialize with others. When they had to socialize with others, antisocial people would also appear to behave strangely, and pretentiously. They always gave people a feeling of nervousness. They were actually very pitiful. They did not necessarily have antisocial psychology or violent tendencies, but they definitely felt autistic, lost, inferior, nervous, and depressed. They were unable to communicate with others normally, which made them prefer to be alone and live in isolation from others. There were not many congenital factors for the formation of antisocial personality. It was mainly due to the negative influence of various subjective and objective environments, which caused the psychological distortion caused by long-term depression. For example, if Nian continued like this when she went to primary school in the future, it was likely that she would be ostracized by her classmates because she did not learn to communicate with her peers. She would be treated as an anomaly by her classmates. A little girl who only knew how to chat with cats all day. Was that not weird enough? The results of the survey showed that about 5% to 8% of the children in primary and secondary school groups would be antisocial. And this was already an extremely exaggerated number. Out of 20 people, there would be one antisocial individual. The class was a group, and antisocial children were always unable to integrate into this group. As a result, they were more likely to be ridiculed, ostracized, and criticized by their classmates. This situation would gradually decrease as the child grew older. However, this process was incomparably long for those pitiful children who were reclusive and eccentric. They would endure all kinds of psychological pressure, but in the end, they would only become a stepping stone in the growth process of others. Many years later, who would remember the freak who was ridiculed and teased in the class? Who would care if that freak was doing well now? Chunshi panicked. After all, he really couldn't cure mental illness. After some serious consideration, he quickly discussed with Qin Ruoying, how about sending Nian to kindergarten? Hearing this, Qin Ruoying immediately nodded. She happened to have the same idea. Although Qin Ruoying wanted to spend more time with Nian, in order to give Nian a healthy and happy environment, it was better to be cautious. As long as it involved their children, any parent would become particularly worried. Even if there was only the slightest possibility, they had to eliminate that possibility in time. The couple reached a consensus. Thus, Chunshi sat beside the little fellow. Nian, Daddy wants to discuss something with you, okay? The little fellow was busy watching cartoons. When Chunshi walked over, he happened to block her line of sight. After a hum, she directly lay on her side on the bed and continued to watch cartoons. Seeing this, Chunshi pretended to be serious and said, Nian, Daddy is talking to you. The little fellow's eyes were full of doubts. After glancing at Chunshi, she muttered, Papa, you're blocking me. Daddy is talking to you. Pause first, or Daddy will be angry. Oh. Chunshi obviously had some weight in the little fellow's heart. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, she obediently took the remote control and pressed the pause button. Then she sat up very obediently. Say it, Papa. Seeing that the little fellow was so obedient, Chunshi nodded very satisfactorily. Then he gently held her in his arms and asked seriously, Nian, do you want to go to kindergarten? However, when the little fellow heard his question, he didn't even think about it and immediately shook his little head like a rattledrum. No, I don't want to go to kindergarten. This was obviously out of Chunshi's expectation, so he quickly asked, Why? Didn't you like kindergarten before? Hearing this, the little fellow pouted and replied loudly, I don't like kindergarten. Perhaps to express her attitude, the little fellow even repeated, I don't like kindergarten. I don't like it. She didn't play her cards according to common sense, and Chunshi was confused. In the past, she clearly wanted to go to kindergarten, but now she suddenly didn't want to go. She changed her mind too quickly. Chunshi had no choice but to patiently persuade her. Nian, kindergarten is very fun. The teachers teach you to draw, put on little red flowers for you, and classmates play games with you. Why don't you want to go? Hearing Chunshi's words, the little fellow instantly exploded. She didn't know why she suddenly became muddle-headed. After pushing Chunshi's arm away, she lay on the bed and rolled left and right, constantly muttering, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't like kindergarten. Chunshi was stunned. When did Nian become like this? She was simply a naughty child. Was there really a problem with his teaching methods? He still remembered that when he first came back, Nian was very obedient and sensible. How long had he been taking care of Nian? How did he raise the child like this? Thinking of this, Chunshi couldn't help but fall into deep reflection. Seeing that the little fellow had flipped out, Qin Ruoying also sat next to her. After gently helping the little fellow up, she patiently asked, Nian, can you tell us why you don't want to go to kindergarten? After hearing this question, the little fellow was stunned for a moment. But right after that, she burst into tears. This time, Qin Ruoying also panicked. She quickly took her into her arms and comforted her softly. Nian, don't cry. If you don't want to go, we won't force you. But you have to tell us why you don't want to go, right? The little fellow cried miserably. Seeing this, Chunshi hurriedly went to the bathroom and brought her a hot towel. The husband and wife worked together and spent a great deal of effort to stop the little fellow from crying. After a while, the little fellow sobbed, pursed her lips, and said very sadly, I don't want to go to kindergarten. I want to be with Papa and Mama. Hearing this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but look at Chunshi, and instantly understood the reason. This poor child, she was raised by Aunt Zhang alone before, and her parents were never by her side. Therefore, when the little fellow had her parents again, she didn't want to be separated from them for a moment. And this was obviously the root cause of her recent muddle-headedness. Since the child said so, it was obvious that she couldn't go to kindergarten. Qin Ruoying held Nian in her arms and thought for a while. Suddenly she said to Chunshi, how about we change the way? What way? Look at the cold weather. There aren't many parents who would bring their children out to play. Nian doesn't want to go to kindergarten. It's definitely not a way to go on. How about this? Let's open a bookstore or a restaurant or a coffee shop so that Nian can meet many strangers. Chapter 134. Open a shop? This idea seems to be good. Of course, if it was other seasons, there would be no need to go through so much trouble. He could just take Nian out to Hohai every day. Over time, she would naturally meet some new friends. But unfortunately, it was winter now, and it was winter in the north. The temperature was low and the wind was strong. Before the ice skating rink was officially opened, the popularity of Shikahai during the day was very bleak. Of course, the so-called bleak popularity refers to the daytime. Hohai was really lively at night. If Sanlaton's bar street was trendy, then Hohai's bar street would undoubtedly be artistic. A small alley near the sea. There was no noisy music. The melodious singing coupled with the unique charm of the old Changjing was definitely a melodious elegy in the modern city. It was really good to open a shop in this kind of artistic and fresh place. Anyway, they were idle all day. Opening a shop to take care of the little guy could also add some fun to their life. Thinking about it, it was also quite good. But the question was, what kind of shop should they open? Chunshi didn't have any ideas. Since it was Qin Ruoying's suggestion, he might as well listen to her opinion. So he smiled and asked, what kind of shop do you want to open? Hearing this, Qin Ruoying frowned and pondered. They weren't short of money. Opening a shop was purely for fun, and to create a new living environment for the little guy. The business couldn't be too good. If it was too good, they wouldn't have time to take care of the child. But it couldn't be too bad. If it was too bad, they could only stare blankly at the door all day. It was better not to open. After thinking for a while, Qin Ruoying couldn't think of a reason, so she proposed to go out and look at the shops around. Hohai Bar Street was formed after the end of the SARS, more than 10 years ago at an incomprehensible speed. She still vaguely remembered that there were only a few small pubs here before. But now looking around, Hohai was densely packed with small pubs on both sides. The family of 3 walked around Hohai. The more Qin Ruoying looked, the more dissatisfied she was. Chunshi saw this, but he didn't say anything. When the little fellow ran to the railing and checked whether the lake water was frozen, Chunshi suddenly smiled and said, Ying, we only opened the shop to let Nian come into contact with more people. As for what kind of shop we open, it doesn't really matter. Hearing this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but be stunned. After carefully thinking about Chunshi's words, she said with some hesitation, I was wrong. Most of the places here are bars. It's really not suitable to open a bookstore. In fact, Qin Ruoying wanted to open a bookstore the most. However, Hohai was still a relatively mature business circle. Hohai Bar Street's reputation was comparable to Sanlitun and Workers' Sports Complex. Therefore, other than bars, there were only a few tea houses, restaurants, food stalls, and so on. There weren't even many supermarkets. Fame had already determined that other shops couldn't survive here. Therefore, Qin Ruoying thought for a long time, but still couldn't think of what kind of shop they should open. Chunshi saw her hesitation and suggested with a smile. "Didn't you see a tea house with a shop for sale sign outside? How about we take it over?" Tea house. Qin Ruoying was a bit surprised, but after seeing Chunshi's serious expression, she had to seriously consider this proposal. In fact, compared to a tea house, Qin Ruoying was more inclined to a coffee shop. But unfortunately, coffee was a Western culture. Therefore, after coming to Hohai, a place with a strong folkloric flavor, it was somewhat unsuitable. When they were walking along the road, they already saw several closed coffee shops. Huaxia had a tea culture since ancient times. Tea was popular in the Tang dynasty and flourished in the Song dynasty. From the emperor, to the literati, to the common people, there was no one who didn't like tea. In the eyes of many young people, the style of coffee seemed to be much higher than tea. But in fact, coffee, cocoa, and tea were known as the three non-alcoholic drinks in the world. Silk, porcelain, and tea, these were also the business cards that Huaxia handed to the world. Before the Bar Street in Hohai rose, there were many tea houses here. Every summer, Hohai Lake was wide, the water was sparkling, willows were hanging on both sides of the lake, lights were shining, and the palace walls and minarets in the distance were reflected in the water. From time to time, there were pleasure boats gently rowing. If at this time, there was a pot of good tea, sitting quietly by the lake and carefully tasting it, wouldn't it be pleasant? This was a kind of cultural charm, belonging to Huaxia, and also belonging to Hohai. Qin Ruoying was moved. Therefore, the couple immediately reached an agreement, called the little girl, and turned to the tea house with a shop for sale sign. The owner was a middle-aged man in his 40s. After hearing Chunshi's intention, he immediately enthusiastically introduced the tea house to them. The size of the tea house was not bad. The lobby was about 70 to 80 square meters, and there was a small courtyard of more than 50 square meters in the back. The overall decoration was very antique, exquisite, and elegant. The shop was the owner's own. Because the business of the tea house was not very good, the owner did not intend to continue to operate, and was ready to rent out the shop to collect rent. The price of a shop in Hohai was not cheap. The better location of the shop, the rent for 1 square meter fluctuated around 300 yuan. In other words, such a large shop, the monthly rent would be at least 40,000 yuan. In a year, the rent alone was close to 500,000 yuan. It was really like an inch of land was worth an inch of gold. Because the owner was the landlord, the transfer fee was saved, but the renovation fee still had to be paid. Chunshi had a lot of money, but he did not want to be a sucker, so he negotiated the price with the owner. After some bargaining, the owner agreed to only charge 200,000 yuan for the renovation fee. The stock in the shop would be calculated separately, and the rent would be 35,000 a month, paid once a year, plus a month's deposit. In order to prevent Chunshi from saying that he was randomly charging the renovation fee, the owner even took out his previous renovation fee list, repeatedly saying that he spent 500,000 to renovate the shop. And if Chunshi rented it to someone else, he would receive 400,000 just for the transfer fee. Although he said so, it was up to Chunshi whether he believed it or not. After all, this was not a small matter, so the owner thought that the young couple would go back to discuss it. But what he did not expect was that the young couple did not hesitate for long. The two simply discussed a few words, and directly decided to rent. The price was agreed, then the next step was simple: look at the property certificate, sign the contract, clear the account, check the goods, pay the money, and a happy cooperation. The transfer of a shop was actually a very troublesome matter. If you want to change the name of the shop, or change the type of business, then you have to let the owner go to the Trade and Commerce Bureau to cancel the original business license, and then Chunshi would go to register again. Chunshi found it troublesome, so he was too lazy to even change the name. Seeing that he was so straightforward, the owner signed an agreement with him, and then handed over the original business license to him. Therefore, in less than a day, this tea house, which was not far from Dongming Alley and adjacent to Hohai, had completely changed owners. Qingyi Tea House. This was the new business of the family of three. While Chunshi was signing the contract with the owner, the little girl took the big cat to wander around the tea house, from time to time touching here and there, as if she was very interested in this place. When Qin Ruoying saw her like this, her heart immediately felt relieved. Chapter 135. The next day, the little fellow was woken up by the sound of bricks colliding. She opened her eyes in a daze, climbed to the window, and found that a group of strangers were moving bluestones into the yard. Chunshi stood in the yard and directed the workers. When Qin Ruoying saw the little fellow get up, she immediately came to her and prepared to help her get up. "Mama, what are they doing?" "The yard is broken. Papa asked someone to repair it. After that, you can play in the yard again. Papa is so nice." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying immediately pinched her little face and asked, "What about Mama?" "Mama is so nice." The little fellow flattered, and Qin Ruoying immediately laughed. After gently picking up the little fellow from the bed, she smiled and said, "Let's go. Mama will take you to wash up." Okay. To repair the yard, first of all, the broken bluestone slabs had to be swept out, and then the mud from outside to fill the big hole. After that, the bluestone slabs could be laid again. The workers made a lot of noise. Qin Xueqing frowned and came out to take a look. Then she slammed the door and went back to the east wing. Recently, she and Qin Yongyan had been completely obsessed with cultivation. They often didn't even go out for a whole day. Chunshi didn't ask them to eat now. Anyway, after the family of three had eaten, Chunshi would put all the leftovers into the insulated cabinet. When Qin Xueqing and Qin Yongyan were hungry, they naturally knew to eat by themselves. After breakfast, Chunshi briefly explained to the person in charge of the decoration company that they must finish the work today. After that, the family of three went out. The original owner of the tea house was a very particular person. When he left yesterday, he had carefully cleaned the tea house. After a brief check, Chunshi took out a sign from the bar and hung it outside the door. It was open. He didn't even change the sign. He didn't know if there would be any old customers. Chunshi sat at the bar and seriously warned the little girl to be sweet and polite, and to take the initiative to greet the guests when they came in. After the little fellow listened to his incessant warning, she nodded her little head numbly. It was unknown whether she understood or not. Chunshi had already seen the boss's account book before, and the business was indeed not good. Because it was winter, there was basically no business in the tea house in the morning. It was only slightly better in the afternoon. Many customers who came to the bar because of its reputation would sit in the tea house with their friends for a while, chatting and playing cards before the bar opened. The tea house was open, and even the signboard was still the same. However, Chunshi had overlooked a very important issue. That was, opening a tea house required a certain amount of connections. The tea house itself was a business of acquaintances, and the gathering and dispersing of qi were closely related to the boss. A successful tea house must have a boss who could be called a social expert. The customers came for the boss, but they also dispersed because of the boss. Therefore, there was a saying often heard in the tea houses that business was good as long as the boss was there. If the boss was not there, there would be no ghosts. On the right side of the lobby, there was a bookshelf next to the window seat, on which were some of the world's classics that the former boss had bought before. Qin Ruoying casually flipped through, then picked up a book called Love in the Time of Cholera, and sat in the booth to read it. Seeing this, Chunshi poured a cup of tea and asked the little fellow to bring it to her. "Nian Nian, come bring a cup of tea to mommy. Be careful, don't burn yourself." In order to make it convenient for the little fellow to take, Chunshi specially chose a hand cup, and only mixed 2/3 of the water. The little fellow held the cup with both hands and walked very slowly. When she carefully came to Qin Ruoying's side, she sweetly shouted, "Mommy, drink tea." Qin Ruoying read carefully, so when the little fellow called her, she found that the little fellow was still holding the teacup, so she quickly took the teacup from the little fellow's hand, and at the same time did not forget to praise, "Ah, Nian Nian is so good." The little fellow was happy, and seemed to think that it was a very pleasant thing to serve tea to others, so she immediately turned and ran to the bar, looked up at Chunshi and asked, "Papa, when will the guests come?" Don't worry, take your time. The most important thing to do business is to be patient." Chunshi smiled and held her in his arms, and then the father and daughter sat behind the bar and chatted. The door opened at 9 o'clock in the morning. After waiting for 2 hours in boredom, the family of 3 finally welcomed their first guest after the opening. To Chunshi's surprise, the guest did not belong to the middle-aged group, but was a young girl. The girl stood outside the door and hesitated for a moment. After looking at the business sign outside the door, she pushed the door and walked in. She wasn't very old, and looked to be about 20 years old. She should be at the age of a down jacket and jeans, but now she was wearing a long coat that did not match her temperament at all, and a combination of pantyhose and boots on the lower half of her body. The girl had put on makeup. Perhaps it was due to her poor technique, but her makeup gave off a strange feeling. Obviously, she was a natural hibiscus, but she had to paint a snake with legs and dress herself up a little. Of course, it would make people feel a little strange. The girl entered the tea house, looked around, and saw that the right side of the booth was already occupied, so she went directly to the left side of the lobby by the window. Seeing this, Chunshi quickly patted the little fellow, indicating that it was time for her to receive the guest. They opened the shop to train the little fellow's social skills. If the little fellow did not perform well, then it would not be too late for him to come forward. Both parents were here, so the little fellow did not seem to be afraid of strangers. After receiving Chunshi's signal, she ran over. "Sister, what do you want to drink?" Looking at the 4 or 5-year-old little girl in front of her, Xiao Yuan could not help but be stunned. This tea house was really strange. The waiter was actually an innocent and lovely child. Seeing that she did not speak, the little fellow thought that she did not hear her, so she asked sweetly again, "Sister, what do you want to drink?" "Papa said that we have everything here." Hearing this, Xiao Yuan could not help laughing, and her mood became much better. After glancing at the price list on the table, Xiao Yuan smiled at the little fellow and said, "Then black tea, thank you." "Oh, okay." The little fellow nodded blankly, as if she did not understand what black tea was. But that was not important. What was important was that they had a guest. So the little fellow immediately turned around and ran back, shouting excitedly as she ran, "Papa! Sister wants black tea. Black tea." The little fellow's voice was very loud and sounded very excited. Even Qin Ruoying was startled by her. "Okay, I got it." Chunshi smiled and patted the little fellow's head, then took out a packet of Kimun black tea from behind the bar counter. Because she was the first customer after the opening, Chunshi injected a trace of spiritual energy into the tea when he made it. Xiao Yuan would never have dreamed that she would be able to win the first prize by randomly finding a tea house before going to work. "Sister, drink tea." The little fellow's little mouth was very sweet, and her cute appearance was enough to make people melt, so Xiao Yuan was instantly captivated by her. Xiao Yuan hesitated for a moment, then quickly took out her phone and asked Chunshi behind the bar counter, "Boss, can I take a photo with your daughter?" Chunshi nodded and smiled. "As long as she agrees." Seeing that she was so popular, the little fellow was so happy that she could not close her mouth. After taking a photo with Xiao Yuan, the little fellow ran back to Chunshi's side, a little embarrassed. Then she burrowed into his arms, rubbing left and right and acting coquettishly. Seeing the little fellow's proud look, Chunshi could not help but nod in satisfaction. Opening a shop allowed the little fellow to interact with strangers, and also allowed her to gain recognition through her performance. Chapter 136. After Xiao Yuan came, 3 more guests came one after another. They were all middle-aged, and it was obvious that they were regulars in the tea house. The 3 of them joked as they pushed open the door of the tea house, but after entering, they couldn't help but be stunned. One of them looked around the lobby with some doubts. After making sure that he didn't go in the wrong way, he looked at Chunshi behind the bar and asked, "Where's old Sue?" Hearing this, Chunshi explained with a smile, "This shop has been transferred. I'm the new owner here. Do you need anything?" "Oh." The man frowned and nodded, then turned to discuss with his companions. After the three of them whispered a few words, the one who spoke before said to Chunxi, 3 cups of plain tea. Okay, please sit wherever you want. After that, they walked directly to the booth behind Qin Ruoying, as if they were very familiar with this place. After seeing them come over, Qin Ruoying hesitated for a moment, then took the book back to the bar. After all, she was the lady boss. It was not good to always occupy the best seat. Chunxi took out 3 cups from the cabinet. The little girl reached out to take it, but Chunxi hurriedly stopped her and said with a smile, "Don't worry, you can't take 3 cups. Daddy will help you." "Oh, okay." The little girl took back her little hand and nodded obediently. After Chunxi handed the cup to her, the little girl carefully followed behind Chunxi with the cup and walked toward the 3 people. "Oh, boss, is this your daughter?" "Well, yes." "How old is she?" 4.5 years old. Seeing the little girl eagerly following behind Chunxi, the person who spoke just now couldn't help but exclaim, "Your daughter is so cute, she's exactly the same as my little one when she was young." Chunxi smiled very politely, then patted the little girl's head and said to her, "Nian Nian, uncle is praising you. You're cute, quickly say thank you to uncle." Hearing this, the little girl said sweetly, "Thank you, uncle." "Oh, your child is so cute." "That's right. Why didn't my wife give me a daughter back then? Come on, with your shabby appearance, how could you give birth to such a beautiful daughter? In my opinion, if your wife had really given birth to such a beautiful daughter for you, I'm afraid you would have taken her for a paternity test long ago. Bah, you can't spit out ivory from your dog mouth." The 3 of them seemed to have a good relationship with each other. Chunxi stood to the side and listened for a while, then said with a smile, "Please sit down. If there's anything you need, just tell me." "Okay, boss, you don't mind us." A Happy's family was always eye-catching. Therefore, Xiao Yuan had been secretly sizing up the family of 3 sitting behind the bar. The boss was handsome, and the lady boss was beautiful and virtuous. They didn't seem to lack money at all, and most importantly, they had a well-behaved and sensible child. Thinking about it, Xiao Yuan couldn't help but have a trace of envy in her eyes. Perhaps she realized that she had lost her composure, but when she saw Chunxi look in her direction, Xiao Yuan immediately lowered her head, then picked up the black tea on the table and drank it. The black tea entered her mouth, and the taste was mellow, but when it slowly seeped into her throat, Xiao Yuan faintly felt that there was a delicate fragrance going from her throat to her stomach. The taste was extremely mellow, fragrant, and sweet, which was simply intoxicating. After tasting it carefully, Xiao Yuan felt that her whole person was much more awake, and there was a sudden feeling of enlightenment in front of her. She held the cup in front of her and carefully studied the black tea. What kind of tea is this? Why is it so delicious? It seems to have the effect of refreshing the mind. Xiao Yuan took another sip, and after tasting it carefully, she suddenly thought of something and quickly looked at the price list on the table. This cup of tea is so delicious. It must be very expensive, right? Thinking of this, she couldn't help but feel a little nervous. She had just looked at the price list, and if she remembered correctly, the cost here wasn't very high. However, the taste of this cup of tea made Xiao Yuan suspect that she had just seen wrongly, so she quickly picked up the price list and carefully looked at it. The cheapest was the vegetarian tea, 20 yuan per cup. Bilyuakun, 28 yuan per cup. Kimon black tea, 38 yuan per cup. And the most expensive Wui de Hong Pao, only 68 yuan per cup. 38 yuan? A cup of caramel macchiato at Starbucks costs more than 30 yuan, and such a mellow black tea only costs 38 yuan? For some reason, Xiao Yuan felt like she had picked up a bargain. If Chunxi knew what she was thinking now, he would probably be unable to help but chuckle. The tea leaves of this kind of tea house were usually bought wholesale from the tea market, 1 bag at a time. A bag of 500 grams, and a cup of 20 kilograms. Each cup of tea only required about 3 to 4 grams of tea leaves, and some people had a strong taste, so they put more than 10 grams of tea leaves. On average, 1 bag of tea leaves could make at least 100 cups of tea. Of course, this didn't mean that the tea house was a profiteering industry. After a little careful calculation, one would know that this tea house was definitely a loss-making business. The profits were high, but the corresponding rent, water, and electricity were also very expensive. The rent here was 35,000 yuan. How many cups of tea would it take to earn that much? Moreover, customers could sit here for a whole day after ordering a cup of tea. The tea house was only so big, so even if the business was booming, there was no way to receive more customers after it was full. Xiao Yuan was still savoring the taste of the black tea when her phone suddenly rang. Xiao Yuan quickly picked up the phone, and a man's voice sounded on the other end. Xiao, you're in luck today. The bill is issued before noon. Come quickly, you can still get lunch. And okay, I'll be right there. After hanging up the phone, Xiao Yuan shouted to Chunxi, "Boss, the bill." Hearing this, Chunxi immediately patted the little girl and said with a smile, "Nian, go collect the money, 38 yuan, remember to count it." Oh! The little girl thought for a moment and nodded. Then she jumped down from Qin Ruoying's arms and ran directly to Xiao Yuan. She imitated Chunxi and said, "Sister, 38 yuan." Xiao Yuan took out 2 20s and handed them directly to the little girl when she came over. The little girl took the money and then ran back to the bar. "Papa here." Seeing this, Chunxi and Qin Ruoying couldn't help looking at each other, and both of them laughed. The child didn't know how to add and subtract. It was simply deliberately making things difficult for her to count the money. "Sister gave too much money, so we have to give her change. Come on, Nian, give these 2 yuan to sister." The little girl was a little confused. However, after hearing Chunxi's words, she obediently took the 2 yuan, and then ran quickly to Xiao Yuan. At this time, Xiao Yuan had already gotten up and was ready to go out. She seemed to have forgotten that the boss should give her change of 2 yuan. Seeing that she was about to push the door open and leave, the little girl hurriedly shouted, "Sister, your money." As she spoke, the little girl waved the money in her hand and ran excitedly to Xiao Yuan's side. Xiao Yuan raised her head and handed the 2 yuan to her. Xiao Yuan stopped and turned to take the 2 yuan in the little girl's hand. She touched her head and said with a smile, "Thank you, sister. Can you tell me your name?" "My name is Chen Yan." "Sister, you can call me Nian." After that, the little girl immediately ran back to the bar, seeming a little embarrassed. "Goodbye, Nian. I'll come to see you tomorrow." Xiao Yuan smiled and shouted at the little girl's back. The little girl didn't look back, so she looked at the couple behind the bar and politely waved to them before leaving. Seeing this, Chunxi smiled at her in response. Xiao Yuan left. Chapter 137. Lin Xian? Qin Ruoying hadn't seen Lin Xian for many years, so her impression of Lin Xian was still in college. However, Chunxi's memory of Lin Xian was not long ago. The cruise ship, the dock, the palm trees. On that sunny afternoon, Lin Xian stood under the shade of the tree and watched the father and daughter get into the car and leave. She stood there for a long time. In fact, the Lin Xian of the past was quite similar to the girl just now. A girl from a small county came to Zhonghai, an international first-tier city, to study and work. At that time, Lin Xian had a kind of maturity that was incompatible with her peers. Of course, that so-called maturity, in retrospect, was also a kind of childishness. When all the impurities were washed away, the girl just now might become like Lin Xian now. Chunxi thought about something thoughtfully. Qin Ruoying glanced at Chunxi and suddenly asked with a smile, "What? Have you met Lin Xian?" Hearing this, Chunxi immediately nodded and replied, "Yes, when I first came back, I asked her about you. When Feng Lei got married, she asked Nian to be her flower girl." "Feng Lei is married?" Thinking about it carefully, I haven't seen them in a long time. Do you think we should go back to Zhonghai to meet them? When do you want to go? Qin Ruoying thought for a moment, looked down at the little girl in her arms, and said, "Let's talk about it next spring. The weather is cold, I don't want to go." "Okay." Chunxi nodded, but then he suddenly thought of something and quickly took out his phone. "Oh, I almost forgot. Your back is such a big thing. We should tell Auntie Zhang the good news first." While speaking, Chunxi opened WeChat. After sending a video call request to Auntie Zhang, Chunxi handed the phone to Qin Ruoying. Qin Ruoying paused for a moment and quickly took the phone. The video call request rang a few times, then it went through with a beep. Auntie Zhang seemed to be busy with something. The screen showed the ceiling of her house. After she accepted the video call, she probably put the phone on the table. Yo, stinky brat, you finally remembered to give this old woman a call? Auntie Zhang's granddaughter was crying. She was so busy comforting her granddaughter that she didn't have time to look at the phone. Qin Ruoying looked at the screen. She didn't see Auntie Zhang, so she hesitated for a moment before saying gently, "Auntie, it's me, Ying." Auntie was stunned. Then he grabbed the phone on the table and shouted at the camera with a surprised face, "Oh my God! Ying, when did you come back?" Seeing that familiar face, Qin Ruoying was also slightly excited. She quickly replied, "I just came back a few days ago. I'm discussing with Chun Shi when to go to Chengdu to visit you." "Thank God you're finally back. Where are Chun Shi and Yin Yin?" Come, let me see your family." Hearing Auntie Zhang's request, Qin Ruoying raised the phone high and then asked Chun Shi and the little girl to come over. In the video, Qin Ruoying leaned close to Chun Shi, and Chun Shi held the little girl in his arms. Both of them looked at her with a smile. The little girl poked her head out and saw Auntie Zhang in the video. She immediately shouted excitedly, "Grandma! Grandma!" As she shouted, she waved her little hand and motioned for Auntie Zhang to look at her. "Io, your family is finally reunited." Looking at the family of three in the video, Auntie Zhang's words were also quite emotional. After so many twists and turns, they were finally reunited. Qin Ruoying and Auntie Zhang talked about old times, and Chun Shi held the little girl and listened with a smile. The two of them chatted for more than half an hour. When Auntie Zhang had to prepare lunch for her granddaughter, Qin Ruoying reluctantly said goodbye to her. She had already made an appointment with Auntie Zhang to go to Chengdu during the new year. Because of the tea house, Chun Shi casually ordered a few dishes at the Chinese restaurant next door for lunch. One for them, and the other for the two cultivation maniacs at home. The business in the afternoon was indeed better. Before 3 o'clock, there were already 4 or 5 tables of customers. Qin Ruoying did the math. The average cost per table was 80 yuan. At least 15 tables of customers were needed to earn back the daily rent. This did not include the artificial water and electricity. Of course, they did not want to make money. Qin Ruoying did the math just for fun. The owner of the tea house was like an immortal couple, the lively and lovely daughter, and the black cat that lay on the bar all day long. In just 3 days, many people knew that the owner of the Qingyi tea house had changed. It was not because Chun Shi was really so eye-catching, but because of the sign hanging at the door. This tea house does not provide chess and card entertainment. This tea house had become a pure tea house. The so-called tea house did not provide chess and card entertainment, but only provided tea and a relatively quiet and relaxing environment. Many people came to the tea house to play cards, so when Chun Shi hung the sign outside that no chess and card entertainment was provided, the business of the tea house went downhill. However, there were gains and losses in everything. The chess and card tea house became a pure tea house. There were fewer individual customers but more frequent customers. For example, Qiao Yuan. Since the day Qiao Yuan drank the black tea here, she would come to the tea house at 11 o'clock every morning. Then she would order a cup of black tea and quietly sit on the sofa to read the book she brought. When she did not receive a call, Qiao Yuan would sit in the tea house all day and would not leave until 6 o'clock in the evening. Every day was like this, so in just a few days, she was very familiar with Nian Yin. Chun Shi found out from chatting with her that Xiao Yuan was a junior at Beijing Normal University. The reason she came here every day was that she recently found a part-time job in Hohai. Her part-time job seemed a bit strange. After 3 days, she only went to work on the first day. For the next 2 days, she sat in the tea house all day reading and only left in the afternoon. Although Xiao Yuan did not say what her part-time job was, Chun Shi thought it might be related to the bar. This afternoon, including Qiao Yuan, there were only 3 tables of customers in the tea house. Suddenly, there was a sudden sound of tires braking on the street outside, followed by a burst of shouting. A customer was alarmed, so he curiously went out of the tea house to take a look. When he went out, he saw a large group of people standing in front of a bar not far away. It was not the opening hours of the bar, And those people did not look like they were here to drink. Some of them seemed to be here to make trouble. This was Hohai Seijo City, under the emperor's feet. It was strange that someone dared to make trouble here in broad daylight. The customer looked around, and then asked his friends to come out and take a look. Qin Ruoying saw this and followed him out. Xiao Yuan sat by the window, so she wanted to see the situation outside through the window. But at this moment, her phone suddenly rang, giving her a fright. Xiao Yuan answered the phone. After listening to a few words, her face changed greatly. She quickly hung up the phone, stood up from her seat, and looked around the tea house at a loss. She ran directly to the bar and then said to Chunshi with a pleading face, "Boss, can you let me hide here for a while?" Chapter 138. There was an empty space below the bar, which was just enough for one person to hide. When Chunshi heard what she said, he was instantly amused. So the commotion outside was caused by her? Xiao Yuan gave Chunshi a good impression of her. She seemed to be like Lin Xian in the past, with poor family conditions, which was why she chose to work part-time in her spare time. Although she deliberately dressed herself up to the nines, she still faintly emitted a reserved and inexperienced aura that belonged to her age. And this was not something that could be covered up by makeup and dressing up. "Then you sit here, I'll go out and take a look at the situation." As he spoke, Chunshi stood up and gave up his chair. When Xiao Yuan saw this, she immediately squatted behind his chair, trying to use the bar and chair to hide her figure. When the little girl saw her sneaking around, she was instantly delighted. After clapping her hands to signal Chunshi to put her down, the little girl ran directly in front of Xiao Yuan and said excitedly, "Sister, do you want to play hide and seek? I can play with you." Hearing this, Xiao Yuan could not help but be speechless. After nervously making a shu gesture, she then said softly to the little girl, "Nian Nian, don't talk to me, just pretend you didn't see me." The little girl looked at her blankly, as if she did not understand what she meant. Xiao Yuan thought for a while, then changed her way of saying, "There are bad people coming to catch me. You don't want sister to be caught by bad people, right?" When she heard this, the little girl finally understood. Hence, the little girl immediately shook her little head like a rattledrum, and at the same time, did not forget to say righteously, "Sister, don't be afraid. I'll protect you. Just pretend you didn't see me." Seeing that Xiao Yuan was trying to explain the situation to the little girl with a conflicted expression, Chunshi could not help but smile slightly. He stood behind the little girl, gently carried her up, then said to her, "Let sister stay here for a while. Daddy will bring you out to watch the commotion." "Okay." Seeing that Chunshi had rescued her from the evil clutches of the little fellow, Xiao Yuan immediately let out a sigh of relief. Then she looked at Chunshi with a complicated expression and said softly, "Boss, thank you." Hearing this, Chunshi smiled at her and comforted her. "It's uncomfortable to squat. Sit on the chair. If you're really scared, I suggest you call the police now." After that, Chunshi carried the little fellow out of the bar. Looking at his back as he left, Xiao Yuan looked down at the phone in her hand thoughtfully. But after a moment of hesitation, she still put the phone in her bag. Then, she hid under the bar counter, trying to hide better. Outside the tea house, when Qin Ruoying saw Chunshi carrying the little fellow out, she immediately came to his side. Chunshi turned his head, and saw that not far from the street, there were more than 10 or 20 people blocking the door of a bar. This group of people was not old, about 20 years old. They were very arrogant, and their mouths were full of obscenities. A young man who looked like the person in charge of the bar was surrounded in the middle, and seemed to be trying to discuss something with them. There were more and more people around. Chunshi listened for a while, and got a general idea of the situation. This was a shill bar. The so-called shill bar was that, while operating normally, it would arrange some keyboard players to chat with people on the internet, using dates as bait to lure people to come here to spend money. If it was a normal customer who came to the bar to spend money, then they would think that the bar was not bad and the cost was not high. But if it was a customer who was brought here by a bartender, then their spending here would be more than 10 times higher. Shill bars were not only in the form of bars. Many coffee shops, restaurants, gift shops, and even tea houses might be shill bars. Shill bars had become a complete industry chain, mainly composed of keyboard players, bartenders, and consumption places. Among them, the larger ones might also have a manager. Keyboard players disguise their information as a young and beautiful woman through social media software such as QQ, WeChat, Momo, Tantuan, or dating websites and dating forums, and then seduce some single men or men with bad intentions to come out and meet them. After the keyboard players chatted with the fat sheep online to a certain extent, the bartenders would come out to meet the customers. They did not need to be too beautiful, just with good facial features. In fact, they also used the dirty thoughts of some men. The meeting place was generally near the shill bar. The bartenders themselves were different from what the fat sheep saw on the internet. Most of the fat sheep would not doubt it, because most of them would be dazzled by this sudden encounter. After the meeting, the bartenders would first accompany the fat sheep for a walk, and then take the opportunity to say that they were tired and wanted to sit in the shill bar. Of course, the fat sheep would not refuse. Instead, he looked forward to the bartenders getting drunk. If the fat sheep had not been dazzled by the encounter, he would look at the price list before the bartenders ordered. The items in the shill bar were all priced clearly. If the fat sheep thought it was expensive, he could leave at any time. But if the fat sheep did not even look at the price list and directly wanted to pretend to be rich in front of the bartenders, then it would be embarrassing. 2 drinks and a fruit plate of 388 yuan. This was only the first step, and the price would be lighter. If the fat sheep agreed to let the bartenders order wine, it would be upgraded to the second step. A red wine that costs more than 10 yuan would be sold here for 1,888 yuan and 3,888 yuan. A black-hearted person could even ask for 8,888 yuan directly. If the fat sheep refused to pay, then sorry, the shill bar's hatchet man would come out. It was not a real fight but a threat. If he did not pay, he would not leave. A smarter fat sheep would ask to share with the bartenders, only give half of the money, and then call the police afterwards. However, it was a pity that the industry itself was in a gray area. As long as the boss of the shill bar was smart, even if the fat sheep called the police afterwards, the boss only needed to refund the money, because they did not break the law. There was a price list on each table. The price was clearly marked, and it was voluntary. Xiao Yuan was obviously a bartender's. But what was strange was that the fat sheep were generally spendthrifts who did not have much social experience. This group of young people who blocked the door of the bar and made trouble were not good people at first glance. To put it bluntly, they were not cut out to be fat sheep. What the hell was going on here? Chun-Shi held the little fellow outside the tea house and watched the bustle. At this time someone said, "She's in the tea house over there." After the group of people heard this sentence, they immediately rushed in the direction of Chun-Shi. Several guests in the tea house were still happily watching the bustle, but when they saw the group of people suddenly coming over, they quickly hid to the side. There was a street outside the tea house, and across the street was Ho-Hai. Chun-Shi and Qin Ruoying stood side by side at the entrance of the tea house. After the group of young people came over, they surrounded them. The little fellow was obviously frightened by their formation, so he immediately shrank back into Chun-Shi's arms. Seeing this, Chun-Shi handed the little fellow to Qin Ruoying, and then motioned her to take the child in first. Chapter 139. Chun-Shi calmly looked at the group of young people in front of him. Among the group of young people, the youngest was about 20 years old, and the oldest was no more than 25 years old. They were all dressed very fashionably, and a few of them were very handsome. However, they did not stand properly, and the moment they opened their mouths were full of obscenities, inadvertently giving people a frivolous and vulgar feeling. The leader was about 24 or 25 years old. After his companions surrounded the door of the tea house, he stood in front of Chun-Shi with a cigarette in his mouth. As if he wanted to create momentum for himself, the young man didn't hold back and directly blew a smoke ring at Chun-Shi. However, he didn't expect the wind to be very strong today. So just as he blew out the smoke ring, a sudden gust of wind blew the smoke ring directly into his face. Choked by the smoke, the young man immediately lowered his head and couldn't help but rub his eyes. As a result, the imposing manner that he had deliberately created was destroyed and completely disappeared. This young man was called Wang Hao, and he was also a famous person in Shangjing's nightclub circle. Whenever it was night time, it was time for Wang Hao to shuttle through the major bars. Recently, Huaxia suddenly set off a hip-hop craze, just like the rock craze of the 80s and 90s, which suddenly became popular all over the country. Wang Hao was one of the first underground rappers. After catching up with the hip-hop craze, he was also in the limelight in Shangjing. Most of the bars in Hohai were small bars, so Wang Hao wasn't familiar with this area. The reason why he brought people here today was because one of his brothers was cheated of money by a bartender. His brother was related to him, and just came out from his hometown to mingle with him. Before, he was a very honest person and didn't see much of the world, so he didn't understand the twists and turns of the bar. After chatting with the keyboard player online for a while, the brother suddenly became hot-headed and wanted to ask the girl to come out and meet. Coincidentally, the bartender that the boss arranged for him was Qiao Yuan. In terms of appearance, Qiao Yuan's appearance was definitely the best among the group of bartenders. As a young man who had just come to Shangjing, when had he ever been in close contact with a beauty of this level? Therefore, he was mesmerized by Qiao Yuan at that time. Qiao Yuan didn't say much to him before he excitedly ordered some wine. The more he drank, the more confused he became. In the end, he directly opened a big order of 20,000 yuan. 20,000 yuan, 20% for the keyboard, 40% for the bartender, and another 40% for the boss. After the order was confirmed, Qiao Yuan would get 8,000 yuan. Usually, the bill would only be settled once every half a month or a month. That was because if the customer called the police, the bill would be refunded. Therefore, the money had not yet reached Qiao Yuan's hands. It was rare to see someone like Wang Hao who didn't call the police and instead brought his own people to cause trouble. Everyone was in the same business. Wang Hao was in the right now. So the boss decisively refunded the 20,000 yuan to him. But what was strange was that Wang Hao was not satisfied with the money he got back. He actually asked the boss to hand over Qiao Yuan. This request was too much. The boss couldn't agree, so he tried to negotiate with them. However, while the boss was negotiating with Wang Hao, a girl who was usually jealous of Qiao Yuan secretly betrayed Qiao Yuan. Therefore, Wang Hao brought people directly to the tea house. The girl who betrayed them was very clever and didn't expose herself. The boss also didn't know who betrayed them. When he saw Wang Hao rushing to the tea house with his men, the owner was a little anxious and hurriedly made a call for help. Refund was a reasonable request, but taking people away was absolutely not. Otherwise, how could he continue to mingle on this street? Unfortunately, it was only 3 in the afternoon, so the thugs were still sleeping at home. After the boss vented his anger on the phone, he looked at the tea house not far away with worry. Most of the people who could open a shop in Hohai weren't easy to deal with. A strong dragon couldn't suppress a snake in its old haunts. Therefore, after Wang Hao fiercely threw the cigarette butt on the ground, he casually said to Chen Shi, "Are you the boss of this shop?" "Yes. This has nothing to do with you. Just hand over that Qiao and we'll leave immediately. We won't hinder your business." After saying that, Wang Hao squinted his eyes and quietly looked at Chen Shi. If people who play rock have a wanton temperament, then people who play hip-hop are obviously their upgraded version. They always act like they are the boss and don't even put Mother Earth in their eyes. However, Chen Shi's answer was somewhat out of his expectations. He saw Chen Shi suddenly smiled and casually replied, "Qiao? I don't know, there's no such person here." *CK, are you trying to scare us? Brother Hao, don't talk nonsense with him. Let's go in and search. Don't let that girl run away. Yes, go in and search. Wang Hao didn't speak, he just looked up and down at Chen Shi. However, the group of young people behind him suddenly couldn't sit still. Chen Shi slowly glanced at the people in front of him. His expression didn't change. He stood quietly at the door of the tea house, as if he didn't intend to let Wang Hao and the others in. But at this moment, a young man who was originally standing at the back of the crowd suddenly moved. He suddenly turned around, picked up a fist-sized stone from the ground, and then directly smashed it toward the tea house's glass. Bang! The expected sound of glass breaking did not ring out. The glass seemed to be tempered glass, and the stone only made a loud collision sound when it hit it. The stone fell to the ground, but the glass didn't move. The young man was not convinced. After fiercely staring at Chun-Shi, he picked up the stone from the ground again. But this time, he didn't smash the stone out. Instead, he stood directly in front of the glass window with the stone. Bang, bang, bang. The young man held the stone and smashed the glass with all his strength. Qin Ruoying sat on the chair next to Qiao Yuan with the little girl in her arms. The little girl shrank in Qin Ruoying's arms. This movement not only scared the little girl, but also the guests in the tea house. Seeing that the young man kept smashing the glass with the stone, the guests retreated to the corner. This group of young people was simply lawless. The young man smashed the stone for a while, but there was still no trace of damage on the glass. At this moment, Chun-Shi spoke. "That's tempered glass. Be careful. Don't hurt your own hand and come back to me later to pay for the medical expenses." As soon as he finished speaking, the young man picked up the stone and smashed it again as if he didn't hear him at all. Bang! The loud collision sounded again. Immediately after, the young man suddenly let out a wail that sounded like a pig being slaughtered. Everyone hurriedly turned to look, only to see him covering his right hand with his left hand and constantly shouting. Blood dripped down from his fingers. It seemed that Chun-Shi was right. Chapter 140. Smashing the glass and injuring his own hand? This sudden turn of events shocked everyone present. It seems to be quite serious. Quickly take him to the doctor to stop the bleeding. Turn left on this street. There is a small clinic less than 200 meters away. Seeing that the young man's hand was bleeding profusely, Chun-Shi reminded Wang Hao with a smile. After hearing Chun-Shi's words, Wang Hao seemed to have finally come back to his senses. He hurriedly asked someone to take the injured person to the clinic to stop the bleeding. After the injured person left, the group of young people in front of him could not help but look at each other. They wanted to smash someone else's glass as a demonstration, but they did not expect to injure their own hand instead of breaking the glass. This was truly a great loss of face. Wang Hao coughed a little awkwardly, but immediately after he said to Chun-Shi with some annoyance, "Boss, I didn't bring so many brothers here today to stand here in the cold wind. You opened the door to do business, so you should know that it's better to avoid trouble. How about you let the girl come out, and we'll part on good terms?" Chun-Shi did not respond. Instead, he smiled and shook his head. "Xianeng, do you believe that we'll smash your broken tea house?" It was unknown who had suddenly said such a sentence. Hearing this, Chun-Shi thought for a moment, then asked with some doubt, "Didn't we smash it just now?" As soon as these words came out, it was like a spark falling into a pile of gunpowder. The group of young people in front of him was instantly ignited by him. A few of the hot-tempered ones were about to rush up on the spot. Looking at their aggressive postures, it seemed like they were about to make a move. However, before Chun-Shi could react, Wang Hao had already opened his arms and stopped them. Wang Hao was not stupid, and he was already past the age of fighting for personal feelings. Although he usually acted extremely arrogantly, in reality, he was very measured in his actions. This was not a small county, but the capital of Huaxia, Shangjing. The water in Shangjing was very deep. If you casually threw a brick on the street, it could hit a big shot that they absolutely could not afford to offend. Wang Hao had come from a small county, and had finally made a name for himself. So how could he do something as stupid as taking the lead to cause trouble? Even if they wanted to make a scene, they would only do so after he left. Just like wine stalls, every industry had its own rules of survival. Throwing stones and smashing glass was actually not a problem at all. Even if they rushed in and smashed things up, they would only need to pay some money in the end. Article 275 of the criminal law clearly stipulates that, in cases of intentional destruction of property, if the loss of public or private property exceeds 5,000 renminbi, the case shall be filed for prosecution. In other words, as long as the loss did not exceed 5,000 yuan, the police would not file a case. These days, hooligans were not scary. What was scary was that hooligans were cultured. Therefore, it was fine to smash the shop, but not to beat people up. Now that there were so many people watching, if this person were to lie on the ground and insist that there was something wrong with his brain, then they would obviously have to spend a short holiday in the police station. However, Wang Hao's patience had been worn out by Chunxi. After signaling them not to make a move, Wang Hao spat on the ground and said fiercely, "Go in and find him." After saying that, Wang Hao stared coldly at Chunxi, as if warning Chunxi not to blindly interfere. Following his order, the young people behind Wang Hao swarmed toward the door of the tea house. However, they were wrong. They did not make a move, but that did not mean that Chunxi would not make a move. Chunxi was too lazy to talk nonsense with them. If anyone dared to approach the door, he would kick them. Being a bartender was not a glorious profession. After figuring out the cause of the matter, Chunxi wanted Qiao Yuan to go out and give them an explanation. After all, it was Qiao Yuan who was wrong first. But unfortunately, this group of young people were very stubborn. Under their superficial skin was an infinitely inflated heart. The group of people wanted to hang a sign on their faces as they walked, saying, "I am the most awesome, I am the best in the world." Their aggressive appearance also scared Nian Nian. Therefore, the side that was supposed to be in the right was particularly hateful in Chunxi's eyes. The two young people who rushed at the front thought that Chunxi did not dare to stop them, so they did not even look at Chunxi and rushed toward the door. However, just as they were about to touch the door of the tea house, Chunxi suddenly kicked them back. Chunxi had a sense of propriety. He did not hurt them, but made it impossible for them to get close to the door. Looking at the two brothers who were kicked back by Chunxi, Wang Hao suddenly flew into a rage. "Ting, you dare to make a move? Beat them to death." Since the other party had made a move, how could he tolerate it? Therefore, he led the charge. At this moment, the door behind Chunxi suddenly opened. "Stop!" With a shout, Qiao Yuan hurriedly ran in front of Chunxi, and then directly blocked him behind her. Qiao Yuan glanced at Wang Hao with slight fear in her eyes. After hesitating for a moment, she pretended to be calm and said, "This has nothing to do with Boss Chen. I am Qiao Qiao. If you have any problems, come at me." Qiao Yuan had been paying attention to the movement outside the door. When she heard that they were about to make a move, she could not help but rush out. Although Qiao Yuan did not understand why these people were looking for her, there was no doubt that this was caused by her, so she could not implicate others. Wang Hao stopped and looked at Qiao Yuan. He could not help but show a strange expression on his face. Qiao Yuan was not stupid. When she realized that the other party had brought a lot of people, she decisively called the police. Therefore, standing in front of Wang Hao, Qiao Yuan had some confidence. She held the phone and shook it in a circle. Then, Qiao Yuan continued to say to Wang Hao, "I'm warning you not to mess around. I just called the police. The police will be here soon." Hearing this, Wang Hao could not help but laugh. He casually mocked, "Call the police? What? What law did we break? B*TC, let me tell you. It was a small matter, but now you've made a big deal out of it. Just you wait." After he finished speaking, he pointed at Qiao Yuan fiercely. Qiao Yuan was frightened by him. She could not help but take a small step back. But what was strange was that Wang Hao did not do anything. Instead, he brought his people directly to the opposite side of the street. Then they stood in a row against the railing. Qiao Yuan was a little confused. She could not help but turn to look at Chunxi and ask, "What happened to them? Did you call the police?" I called the police." "Then let's wait for the police to come." After he finished speaking, Chunxi turned and returned to the tea house. Qiao Yuan looked back at Wang Hao and his people with some doubts. She realized that he was still staring at her fiercely, so she followed Chunxi into the tea house in fear. Gangsters had a characteristic, which was that they bullied the weak and feared the strong. So when they heard that the police were coming, they immediately became obedient. But so what if the police came? Were they going to take them all back to the police station? In Wang Hao's words, that was Chapter 141. After hearing that Qiao Yuan had called the police, Wang Hao and his men dispersed. Gathering a crowd to make trouble? No, they just came to Hohai to see the scenery. Xiao Yuan was still a little confused, but seeing that Wang Hao and his men hadn't left, she didn't dare to run around, and could only obediently follow Chen Shi back to the tea house. After Chen Shi returned to the tea house, the guests at the two tables gave him a thumbs up and praised. "Boss, you're amazing, you're a real man." Not to mention who was right and who was wrong, just Chen Shi blocking the entrance of the tea house by himself was enough to make them applaud and praise him. This boss was very competent. Qin Ruoying whispered to the little girl at the bar, making her giggle from time to time. After seeing that Chen Shi had returned, the little girl immediately rubbed against Qin Ruoying's arms and reached out for Chen Shi to carry her. After Chen Shi picked her up from Qin Ruoying's arms, the little girl asked sweetly, "Papa, what were you doing outside?" Papa was reasoning with them. Why? Did they scare you? Hearing this, the little girl immediately shook her head and pouted. No, I don't like them. Children were sometimes very strange, and the first impression a stranger left on them was very important. If this person was someone they liked, then they would immediately be very kind to this person, as if they were familiar with him. But if this person wasn't someone they liked, then sorry, the child would stay as far away as possible. Unless their parents were around, they wouldn't get too close. The group of people outside was obviously not the little girl's favorite. Chen Shi touched the little girl's little face and said with a smile, "This is our home. If you don't like them, then Papa won't let them in, okay?" Okay. The little girl happily acted coquettishly. At this time, Xiao Yuan slowly walked over. After hesitating for a moment, she said very embarrassedly, "Boss, I'm sorry for the trouble." After saying that, Xiao Yuan suddenly bowed to Chen Shi. Before Chen Shi could say anything, Qin Ruoying waved at her and smiled. "It's nothing. Why don't you come over and have a chat?" Hearing the lady boss's words, Xiao Yuan obediently sat beside her. "How long have you been in this business?" "Half a month." "How much did you earn?" Xiao Yuan was stunned for a moment. Then she said hesitantly, "If this order is included, it should be more than 20,000 yuan. However, the bill hasn't been paid yet. Why do you want to do this? If I remember correctly, you are a student of Beijing Normal University, right?" Qingbei is from Beijing Normal University, and Beijing Normal University is known as one of the 4 famous universities in Beijing. It can even be ranked in the top 20 in the country. Do you think it's appropriate for a student from Beijing Normal University to be a prostitute? Qin Ruoying's voice was very soft and gentle, but every word pierced Xiao Yuan's heart. Xiao Yuan lowered her head in silence. After a long while, her tears flowed down silently. Seeing that his wife was about to talk about life ideals with others, Chen Shi held the little fellow and sat in the center of the lobby, leaving some private space for them. Xiao Yuan sobbed in a low voice. Qin Ruoying waited for a moment, then took out a few tissues and handed them to her. "Can you tell me why?" Xiao Yuan took the tissues and wiped her tears. After taking a deep breath, she looked at Qin Ruoying and said sadly, "My father is sick. He needs money. I've done a lot of work, but I can't make any money. Someone recommended me to work in a KTV. I was afraid, so I didn't go. But I really need money, so they recommended me to be a prostitute." Xiao Yuan's family was very ordinary. Her father was a middle school teacher, and her mother was an elementary school teacher. Their income was not high. They relied on her father's tuition classes to earn some extra money. Their family barely reached the standard of a well-off family. She was a very happy girl. Although her family was not rich, she did not have to worry about food and clothing. Her family was happy. She could be regarded as a pretty girl in a small family. Xiao Yuan also worked hard. She was the top liberal arts scholar in her county during the college entrance examination. However, sometimes the reality was more cliché than stories. After all, life was like an electrocardiogram. If it was smooth sailing, it meant that you were dead. 3 years ago, Xiao Yuan's father was diagnosed with chronic uremia. So there were only 2 paths left in front of them: lifelong dialysis or kidney transplant. The price of dialysis was not too expensive. The charge was slightly different in each place. The price of a single dialysis was about 400 yuan. A patient had to undergo dialysis at least 3 or 4 times a week, about 13 times a month. It cost 5,200 yuan. About 60,000 yuan a year. 60,000 yuan didn't sound like much. However, for an ordinary family in a small county, this was already a huge expense. Because of his health, Qiao Yuan's father was forced to close the tuition classes. However, he did not quit. Instead, he insisted on going to work every day. Qiao Yuan's father often said, Qiao, don't worry about family matters. Just study hard. When you graduate and find a good job, Dad can enjoy life. This illness was not life-threatening for a while, but it would put a lot of financial pressure on a family. So every time Qiao Yuan returned home, she would feel that her parents had aged a lot. It was also because of this that Qiao Yuan worked part-time, while studying hard to earn scholarships since her freshman year. She had done many jobs, such as waitress, tutor, courier, and part-time model. Part-time model was the fastest way to earn money, but this kind of good thing was not common. In fact, she had the qualifications to become a contract model, but Qiao Yuan did not forget that she was still a student. So she decisively refused. She wanted to give her father a kidney transplant, but it was a sky-high price. The kidney source started at 200,000 yuan, and the surgery cost 50,000 to 60,000 yuan. After the kidney transplant was successful, he would need to take anti-rejection drugs, which cost about 10,000 yuan a month. After half a year, she would have to pray that there would be no infection or rejection. Otherwise, the condition might worsen. Moreover, a kidney source was not easy to find. Although a kidney transplant might not be able to cure him, compared to lifelong dialysis, a kidney transplant was indeed the most ideal treatment. So Qiao Yuan only wanted to save 300,000 yuan as soon as possible, in case a suitable kidney source appeared in the future, and she did not have the money to give her father a kidney transplant. Qiao Yuan was very thrifty. Even the clothes she was wearing were borrowed from her best friend. There were 38 cups of black tea in Chen Xi's tea house. If it were not for the fact that the bar saleswoman had to wait near the bar at all times, and sometimes she would wait for a whole day, she would not come in and sit down for a cup of tea. Being a bar saleswoman was indeed very profitable. In addition, she had some beauty. So Qiao Yuan had successfully slaughtered a few fat sheep in just half a month. The money came so easily, but it also made Qiao Yuan feel a sense of guilt. So she saved these people's phone numbers. She had already decided that when her father recovered from his illness, she would return the money to these people one by one and sincerely say, "Thank you." She really could not think of any other way, so sorry. Qin Ruoying was a very qualified listener. She sat there and quietly listened to Qiao Yuan's story. After Qiao Yuan finished her story, Qiao Yuan could no longer hold it in. She suddenly lay on the bar counter and burst into tears. Perhaps she had been suppressed for too long. So the girl cried very sadly. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying gently put the tissue next to Qiao Yuan. Then she looked at Chen Xi thoughtfully. Chen Xi saw this and nodded gently at her. With his 5 senses, he could easily determine whether the girl was lying or not. When Qiao Yuan was talking just now, Chen Xi was listening quietly by the side. So he was very sure that the girl was not lying. Chapter 142. After listening to Qiao Yuan's story for a few minutes, there was a burst of sirens on the street outside. The Ministry of Public Security's 110 Police Service Standardization Standards clearly stated that police personnel must respond quickly after receiving a police order. Any major threat to the personal and property safety of citizens, emergency call for help. In the city, they must arrive at the scene within 5 minutes. In the suburbs, they must arrive at the scene within 10 minutes. This was a hard indicator, so don't make a false police report. Otherwise, you will be invited to drink tea for a few hours. Seeing that the police came, Chen Xi handed the little guy to Qin Ruoying, and he walked out with Qiao Yuan. The police car stopped in front of the tea house. The driver was a middle-aged policeman, and the policeman in the passenger seat was younger, about the same age as Wang Hao. At first glance, it was the standard of a civilian police and an auxiliary police. The middle-aged policeman was not polite. After glancing at Wang Hao and his group, he directly asked Chen Xi, "Did you call the police?" Chen Xi nodded. When he was about to explain the situation to the policeman, The middle-aged policeman pointed at Wang Hao and his group and asked, "Is it them?" Hearing this, Xiao Yuan suddenly acted like a class monitor reporting to the teacher. She quickly interrupted and said, "It's them. They just blocked the entrance of the tea house and caused trouble. They even smashed the window." "Did they do anything? Did they suffer any losses?" Xiao Yuan was stunned for a moment. After glancing at the untouched window, she said with some difficulty, "They didn't do anything. It seems that there are no losses." "Okay, I got it." The middle-aged policeman nodded, then turned and walked directly across the street. This was a bar street, so there were often some drunk people causing trouble here. As a policeman in the area, he had seen too many, so he was not surprised by these situations. "Who's the leader?" As soon as the middle-aged policeman's voice fell, Wang Hao immediately replied with a smile. "There's no leader. Just a few friends gathering here, chatting and looking at the scenery of Hohai." "Don't give me that. Hurry up and leave. Do what you need to do." The middle-aged policeman glared at him and waved his hand to let them leave. Seeing this, Wang Hao said with some dissatisfaction, "Hey officer, we didn't break the law, right? This is not Zongnanhai. Are we not allowed to hang out here?" "That's right. Isn't this bar street? We still have to wait for the night to drink," one of the lackeys casually added. But when he spoke, his eyes were looking at Hohai, as if he didn't dare to look at the middle-aged policeman. The middle-aged policeman was also a veteran. He naturally knew how to deal with this group of punks, so he immediately said to Wang Hao, "Take out your ID card." Wang Hao didn't seem to hear him clearly. The middle-aged policeman glanced at him, then suddenly saluted him. Then he took out his ID and said seriously, "There have been many robberies around here. In order to ensure the safety of the people, I have the right to interrogate you. Please cooperate with the investigation. Otherwise, I have the right to forcibly summon you. If you have any objections, you can call 110 or 12,389 to complain. This is my police number. Please show me your ID card." Wang Hao was terrified when he saw that the middle-aged policeman seemed to have changed into a different person in an instant. Therefore, he quickly squeezed out a smile and saluted to the policeman. Then he said with a cheeky smile, "Understood, right away, we'll leave right away." After that, he called his brothers and left. The middle-aged policeman saw that he was tactful, so he was satisfied and took back his ID. As a basic policeman, he was also considered to be a very responsible kind, so he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he was going to wait until Wang Hao and his group left. Under the gaze of the middle-aged policeman, Wang Hao had to reluctantly take his group to their car. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. So before he left, he didn't forget to give Chun-Shi a middle finger, and then slowly made a gesture of slitting his neck. Looking at his posture, he seemed to be silently telling Chun-Shi that this matter wasn't over yet. The characteristics of hooligans, besides bullying the weak and fearing the strong, were also disgusting. If a business offended them, they wouldn't hurt them, but they would endlessly harass them, making it impossible for them to do business. Xiao Yuan also understood what Wang Hao wanted to express, so she quickly said to Chun-Shi, "Boss, I'm sorry. I'll go and explain it to them." After that, she wanted to chase after Wang Hao and his group. This matter had to be resolved. Why not take advantage of the fact that the police were still here and have a good talk with Wang Hao? At most, she would just have to pay for it. However, Xiao Yuan had just taken 2 steps when Chun-Shi suddenly pulled her back, then shook his head at her, indicating that she shouldn't go. It had to be said that Xiao Yuan really thought of this matter too simply. Wang Hao was obviously coming for her. Although she didn't know what they wanted to do, it was obviously not for money. There must be another purpose. Seeing that Xiao Yuan was still confused, Chun-Shi sighed softly, "Don't go. I think they're not doing it for money, but for you as a person." "Me as a person? What do you mean?" "Boss, I don't understand." However, Chun-Shi shook his head and didn't explain further. Seeing this, Xiao Yuan could only stand beside Chun-Shi obediently. The boss had just saved her, so he shouldn't be a bad person. Listening to him should be the right thing to do. Wang Hao and his group drove 4 cars. They weren't luxury cars, but after the cars started, there was a rumbling sound. Obviously, they were modified cars, and the throttle was changed and the turbine was installed, so when the accelerator was stepped on, there was a deafening roar. As if to demonstrate, when Wang Hao drove past the door of the tea house, he deliberately stepped on the accelerator, making the noise even louder. Qiao Yuan couldn't help but cover her ears. The middle-aged policeman stood silently by the side, looking at Wang Hao and his group with a blank face. He was a policeman, not a traffic policeman, so he couldn't do anything about this kind of thing. Otherwise, he would have detained these bastards' cars. Wang Hao rolled down the window, spitting out a mouthful of saliva, then opened his mouth and silently said, F***CKU. Then he gave Chunshi the middle finger again, changing gears, braking, and stepping on the accelerator. After a set of smooth operations, Wang Hao laughed wildly and sped up. The 4 modified cars roared and sped away in an instant. The middle-aged policeman shook his head, as if he was lamenting the degeneration of the world. However, at this moment, Chunshi suddenly waved his arm. Then, Wang Hao's car slammed into the railing of Hohai. Bang! In order to send them on their way, Chunshi even broke the railing. Therefore, when Wang Hao's car hit the railing immediately broke, and his car flew into Hohai. The skating rink in Hohai usually opened in January. Although some places were already frozen, it wasn't very thick. The car fell into the water, causing a huge splash. The middle-aged policeman was stunned by the scene in front of him. It wasn't until the car slowly sank into the water that he suddenly came back to his senses, and quickly called the auxiliary police to help him save people. It was just a small punishment and a big warning, not really taking their lives. Therefore, in order to prevent any accidents, Chunshi had already considerately opened the car door for Wang Hao while he was still in the air. Chapter 143. This year was not a warm winter, but a cold winter. So in December, the water surface of Hohai had already condensed a thin layer of ice. Wang Hao's car was filled with 5 people. After the car drove into the water, the 5 people struggled to swim back to the shore. The other people on the shore hurriedly pulled them up. Looking at the people who were squeezing into the car, the middle-aged policeman couldn't help but sigh, karma. Although tourists accidentally fell into Hohai from time to time, the middle-aged policeman had been in this area for so long, and he really hadn't heard of anyone who could drive a car into Hohai. The car was probably scrapped, and how to get it out had become a big problem. It was estimated that the Shikahai subdistrict community would seek compensation from them. This group of stinky brats was also unlucky. But this was no longer the middle-aged policeman's business, so he called the young policeman and prepared to leave. Comrade, take care. After Chunshi smiled and said hello to the middle-aged policeman, he took Qiao Yuan back to the tea house. As soon as they walked into the tea house, Qin Ruoying glanced at Chunshi with a smile. She knew what happened outside, so she guessed that this must be Chunshi's good deed. Young people don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. A little punishment is okay. After being disturbed by this group of bastards, the guests at the table who just left didn't even pay the bill. Now they didn't know where they went. After the couple cleaned up the teacups at their table, they returned to the bar with the little girl in their arms. Qiao Yuan stood in the lobby stupidly and looked at their calm appearance. For a while she didn't know what to say. After a long time, Qiao Yuan came to the bar, bowed to the couple and said sincerely, "Boss, lady boss, thank you." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying said with a smile, "Give you a piece of advice, don't do this in the future. This is not a glorious career. With your education, you should be able to find a very good job in the future. I hope you can distinguish the priorities and don't ruin your future." After hearing her words, Qiao Yuan fell silent. After hesitating for a while, she nodded lightly and said in a low voice with a complicated expression, "I understand. Thank you, lady boss." Qin Ruoying smiled and turned to look at Chunshi. Chunshi looked at his wife helplessly. Then, he grabbed a black pill from the plate of sunflower seeds in front of the big cat. The big cat was lying lazily on the bar counter. When it saw that one of its snacks was taken away, it immediately stuck its head out and let out a dissatisfied meow. Chunshi stroked its head, then smiled at Qiao Yuan and said, "This is a pill left behind by an old Chinese doctor. I heard that it's especially helpful for kidney diseases. You can take this pill back to your father and see if it has any effect. Don't worry, it's a pure Chinese medicine formula. Even if it doesn't have any effect, there definitely won't be any side effects. Qiao Yuan took the pill skeptically. After glancing at it, she wrapped the pill in a tissue and said to Chunxi solemnly, "Thank you, boss. Go, come, Nian, say goodbye to your sister." "Goodbye, sister." Hearing this, the little girl immediately stood on Chunxi's lap and stuck her head out from behind the bar counter. She smiled and waved goodbye to Qiao Yuan. "Goodbye, Nian, sister will come to see you later." Qiao Yuan turned and left with a complicated expression. After leaving the tea house, she couldn't help but look back at the signboard with the words Qingyi Tea House written on it. Then, as if she had finally made up her mind, she quickly walked towards the bar. The weather wasn't very good today. It was always gray. Although it wasn't hazy yet, there wasn't even a bit of sunlight in the cold weather. There was no way to cheer people up. After the little episode just now, it was already 4:30 in the afternoon. Perhaps she had been infected by the big cat. The little girl sat on Chunxi's lap and lazily put her chin on the bar counter. She constantly blew with her small mouth, trying to blow a tissue into the air. Chunxi wanted to take her out for a walk, but the little girl pouted and shook her head. It looked like she didn't want to move at all. The TV in the tea house didn't have a broadcasting function, so she couldn't order cartoons. Since she couldn't watch cartoons, she wanted to serve tea to the customers. There weren't many customers, so the little girl was bored to death. Qin Ruoying saw this and smiled gently. "Nian, mommy will tell you a story, okay?" Hearing this, the little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. Mommy's stories were better than daddy's stories. So she immediately climbed from Chunxi's lap to Qin Ruoying's lap. Then she shook Qin Ruoying's arm and smiled. "Mommy, tell me." "Okay, sit down first. Mommy will tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a temple on the mountain." Qin Ruoying told the little girl the story of the 3 monks. But before the story was half finished, the door of the tea house was suddenly pushed open. Seeing this, Chunxi interrupted Qin Ruoying's story and said directly to the little girl, "Nian, look, there are guests." Guests? After a few days of getting used to it, the little girl had become familiar with the reception work of the tea house. So when she heard that there were guests, she was so excited that she wanted to jump out of Qin Ruoying's arms. Qin Ruoying was afraid that she would jump and fall, so she had to put her down carefully. The little girl seemed to be very enthusiastic about greeting guests. So when she stepped on the ground, she ran out from behind the bar counter. However, when the little girl ran out of the bar counter and saw the guests, she couldn't help but be stunned. Immediately after, she ran back to the bar counter and hid. Seeing this, Chunxi picked her up and carried her out of the bar counter. "Hello, please take a seat." The person who came was an old man. That wasn't the point. The point was that he had 2 children who were about the same age as Nian. The 2 children looked exactly the same, and they were dressed exactly the same. They looked like they were carved out of the same mold. Twins. It was the first time that other children had appeared in the tea house, and they were a pair. The little girl had never seen twins before, so she was scared and ran back. After hearing Chunxi's words, the old man took the twins and sat in the seat where Qiao Yuan had sat before. After carrying the little girl to the old man's side, Chunxi asked with a smile, "What would you like to drink, sir?" The old man didn't say anything. Instead, he looked at the little girl in Chunxi's arms with interest. The little girl seemed to be a little shy. She lay on Chunxi's shoulder and didn't dare to turn her head. "This is your daughter?" Yes. "How old is she?" 4.5 years old. Hearing this, the old man couldn't help but laugh. Then he pointed at the twins who were squeezed on the sofa and said, "What a coincidence, these 2 children are also 4.5 years old." "It is a bit of a coincidence." As he spoke, Chunxi put the little girl on the ground. Then he held her hand and said to her, "Nian, come and say hello to Grandpa." The little girl hesitated for a moment. Then, with Chunxi's encouragement, she said very politely to the old man, "Hello, Grandpa." Chapter 144. Twins. According to statistics, the average birth rate of twins in the world was 89:1. In other words, out of every 89 pregnant women, there would be one who would give birth to twins. Before the two-child policy was introduced, the number of births per day in Huaxia was around 20,800. If it was accurate to the second, then Huaxia would give birth to a baby every 4.15 seconds. Even with a 1% probability, Huaxia would give birth to 2,000 pairs of twins per day. After the two-child policy was introduced, this number would double. Twins were not a particularly rare existence. However, the little girl was too young, so when she saw two children who looked exactly the same, she was immediately frightened. After she obediently greeted her grandfather, the little girl immediately shrank behind Chunxi, then carefully looked at the twins in front of her. The twins were both boys. They had delicate features and were very cute. Twins generally looked very similar because they were identical twins, so the genes they carried were almost the same. A small number of twins did not look alike, but that was because they were heterozygotic twins. If the mother laid 2 eggs and produced 2 fertilized eggs, then the genes they carried would naturally be different. When they grew up, there would be a clear difference. The twins did look very similar, and the children were still young, so even with Chunxi's eyesight, he could only find a few subtle differences. Seeing that the little girl was a little scared, Chunxi picked her up, then smiled at the old man and said, "The children look so similar. How do you usually tell them apart?" Hearing this, the old man laughed and said, "The older brother has a mole behind his earlobe, but the younger brother doesn't, but it's not obvious, so I made a mark on their clothes." After that, the old man asked the 2 children to turn around. Hearing their grandfather's words, the twins obediently turned around and lay on the sofa. At this time, Chunxi realized that there were numbers written on the back of their clothes. On the left was 1, and on the right was 2. Didn't the 18th National Assembly propose to talk about civilization? So I named the children Civilization. The left is the older brother, and the right is the younger brother, Xiaowen Xiaoming. Civilization? Chunxi pondered for a moment, then said to the little fellow with a smile, "Come on, Nian Nian, introduce yourself to Grandpa." The little guy hugged Chunxi's neck with one hand, and tilted his head to look at the twins. After that, he quickly turned his head and buried his little head in Chunxi's shoulder. Seeing her like an ostrich, Chunxi could only say to the old man apologetically, "Sorry, the child is shy. It's okay. My 2 kids used to be afraid of strangers too. I've gotten used to bringing them out for a stroll." After chatting with the old man for a while, Chunxi suddenly remembered his duty, so he quickly pointed to the price list on the table and said with a smile, "What do you want?" "Vegetarian tea. I have something to do later, so I'll leave after sitting for a while." "All right, please wait a moment." Chunxi returned to the bar with the little fellow in his arms. Qin Ruoying also noticed the little fellow's strange behavior, so she quickly asked, "What's wrong?" She probably hasn't seen twins before, so she's scared. While talking, Chunxi handed the little fellow to Qin Ruoying. Hearing this, Qin Ruoying had to take the little fellow from Chunxi's hands, and then explain to her what twins were. At this time, Chunxi made a cup of tea for the old man. The waiters were on strike, so only he, the boss, had to do it personally. The little fellow rarely dealt with people of the same age. Now there were 2 of them, and they looked exactly the same, so naturally she was scared. After listening to Qin Ruoying's explanation, the little fellow nodded as if he understood something. Tilting her head and thinking for a while, she suddenly pouted and asked, "Mommy, why don't I have a sister who looks exactly the same?" Qin Ruoying was amused by her, so she pinched the tip of her little nose and asked, "You want a sister?" Hearing this, the little fellow immediately nodded, then said with anticipation, "I want a sister. A sister can play with me." You only know how to play." In fact, Qin Ruoying had already guessed why she wanted a sister. It was because she was lonely, and there was no one of the same age to play with her. She and Chunxi had no plans to have a second child for the time being, and distant water could not put out a nearby fire, so the best way now was to bring the little fellow out to interact with people of the same age. Thinking of this, Qin Ruoying carried the little fellow, then walked directly to the twins. Chunshi placed the teacup in front of the old man and was about to turn back to the bar when Qin Ruoying brought the little fellow over. The husband and wife had a tacit understanding, and Chunshi understood her meaning without a word of explanation. Thus, after Chunshi's introduction, the old man also understood the purpose of Qin Ruoying's visit. Every parent hoped that their children would be able to play with their peers because for children under the age of 6, this was something that would only be beneficial and not detrimental. Seeing that the old man agreed, Qin Ruoying did not stand on ceremony and directly brought the little fellow to the twins, then smiled at the two children and asked, "Can you let your sister play with you?" After hearing her words, the older brother sitting on the left heard her, and without discussing with his younger brother, he immediately said, "Okay." Then he looked at the old man and asked, "Grandpa, can we play marbles with our sister?" "Go, don't bully her." "No. We won't bully her, we want to protect her." The older brother jumped down from the sofa excitedly, patted his chest and promised. He directly took the little fellow's hand, like a little adult, and said to the little fellow, "Sister, I'll play with you." "Me too." The younger brother seemed to be afraid that they would miss him, so he immediately squeezed from behind the older brother. Looking at the younger brother, it seemed that he also wanted to hold the little fellow. Thus, Qin Ruoying handed the little fellow's left hand to him. The two brothers were actually more than 2 months older than the little fellow. When the three of them stood together, they were half a head taller than the little fellow. The two brothers took Nian Nian around the hall. After finding an open space in the corner, they immediately squatted on the ground and took out marbles from their pockets. The little fellow had not played with glass marbles yet. Therefore, when she saw the colorful glass marbles, she was immediately attracted by the glass ball with a strange pattern in the middle. The little fellow grabbed a marble and played with it. Seeing this, the older brother immediately said to her, "Sister, we'll teach you how to play." Okay. Children could always play together happily. Qin Ruoying stood beside the three little fellows with a smile, quietly watching them play marbles. The little fellow had not played with people of the same age for a long time, so in the beginning, she was a little reserved. But after playing for a while, the little fellow gradually let go of herself, and the range of her movements and laughter became louder and louder. Chapter 145. Playing marbles was actually a very fair competitive game, and it was very helpful for children to learn physics in the future. For example, when they learned about parabola, momentum, force, and other subjects, they could not help but think of playing marbles as a child. This also made it easier for children to understand the content of the teacher's lecture. The little girl had never played this kind of game in her life, so she was immediately excited. The twins were already veterans at this game. When they saw that their sister did not know how to play, they let her play. The little girl played 3 times, but they only played once. Qin Ruoying accompanied the children, and Chunshi accompanied the old man to play Go. However, halfway through the game, the old man's phone suddenly rang. The old man took out his phone and looked at it. His face suddenly sank. After picking up the phone, the old man did not wait for the person on the other end of the phone to speak first. He said directly into the phone, "I'm here, don't rush me." After that, he seemed very impatient and hung up the phone. When Chunshi saw this, he smiled and asked, "Is there anything else?" "Sai, some family matters. I have to go. I lost this game. Let's come back another day." The old man shook his head and said. After a gentle sigh, he stood up reluctantly and asked casually, "How much is this tea? You've been sitting here for less than half an hour, and you haven't drunk much tea. You don't have to pay. This bill is on me." Since Chunshi said so, the old man didn't hold back. After thanking Chunshi, he told his 2 grandsons that it was time to leave. When the twins heard their grandfather's call, they were stunned for a moment. They could not help but mutter, "So fast." They seemed to know that they had something to do later, so they reluctantly said to the little girl, "Sister, we have to go. We'll come back tomorrow to play with you." While talking, the 2 brothers also picked up the marbles on the ground. When the little girl saw this, her face was full of reluctance. However, there was no other way. They had to leave, so she had to silently help the two brothers pick up the marbles. That green one is mine. When the younger brother saw that his marble was taken away, he was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He pounced and snatched the green marble back from his older brother's hand. The little fellow squatted on the ground and silently watched them pick their marbles. She had a pitiful look on her face, as if she was very reluctant to let the two brothers leave. The two brothers put away the marbles and stood up. At this time, the elder brother seemed to have noticed the little fellow's abnormality. He hesitated for a moment, but still chose something in his pocket. After a while, the elder brother took out 2 marbles from his pocket and handed them to the little girl. "Sister, these 2 are for you." The little guy was stunned for a moment. He raised his head and glanced at his brother before hesitantly taking the marble from his hand. "And mine. I'll give you 2 as well." The younger brother was never willing to fall behind his older brother. After seeing his older brother give the marbles to the little guy, he also quickly grabbed 2 marbles and stuffed them into the little guy's hands. However, after giving away the marbles, the younger brother regretted it. Because the 2 marbles that his older brother gave were carefully selected with the ugliest patterns, but he gave the 2 prettiest ones. Although he felt a little heartache, the younger brother was still a man after all. So he knew that since he had given it away, he couldn't go back on his words. Thus, he stood together with his older brother and waved goodbye to the little guy. "Goodbye, sister. I'll come and play with you in the future. And me, I'll come and play with you too." The 2 brothers fought to be the first to say goodbye to the little guy. Seeing this, the little girl also stood up and waved her small hand that was holding the marbles at them. "Goodbye." The twins left. The little guy stood on the spot and lowered his head to look at the marbles in his hands. No one knew what he was thinking about. Qin Ruoying waited quietly for a while before lightly walking over. He squatted beside the little guy and pulled him into his arms. "Nian, your brothers gave you something. Did you say thank you to them?" Hearing this, the little guy immediately used his little hands to hug Qin Ruoying's neck. After thinking for a while, she then asked in anticipation beside Qin Ruoying's ear, "Mama, when will my brothers come and play with me again?" Qin Ruoying smiled and didn't answer immediately. She carried the little guy to Chunxi's side. Chunxi took the little guy and used his hand to scratch the tip of her little nose. He then smiled and said to her, "Your brothers will come again tomorrow and play with you again. Are you happy?" "Happy." Hearing Chunxi's words, the little guy finally broke into a smile and happily played with the marbles. Seeing this, the husband and wife both laughed. Twins were really much more fortunate than only children. The next morning, the little guy seemed to still be thinking about the 2 little brothers who looked exactly the same yesterday. So just after drinking a mouthful of pumpkin porridge, she couldn't wait to shout that she wanted to go to the tea house. "Nian, don't be anxious. Finish your breakfast first. It's still early now. They won't come even if you go." Qin Ruoying served the little guy breakfast while Chunxi tidied up the room. After the family of 3 finished breakfast and were about to leave for the tea house, the door of the east wing suddenly opened. Qin Xueqing actually went out. She had just walked out of the door when she saw the family of 3 standing on the steps of the west wing, staring straight at her. Stunned for a moment, Qin Xueqing asked awkwardly, "What's wrong?" "Oh, did the sun rise from the west today?" Chunxi said as he pretended to look at the sky. Qin Xueqing heard him say this and suddenly felt a little embarrassed. During this period of time, she and Qin Yongyan hid in the room all day to cultivate. They didn't even eat on time. Luckily, Chunxi left food for them every day. Cultivate, eat and sleep. They only did these 3 things every day. They were simply lazy. Qin Ruoying knew his sister's character very well. He was afraid that Chunxi's joke would make her angry again, so he asked with a smile, "Are you going out?" "Yes, I just received a call from the leader. There's something I need to deal with." "Then be careful. If there's a problem, you can call us." Hearing this, Qin Xueqing couldn't help but look at Qin Ruoying, then quickly glanced at Chunxi. Then she nodded slightly hesitantly and said, "Okay, then I'll go first." "Go ahead." After Qin Xueqing quickly walked out of the courtyard, Chunshi looked at Qin Ruoying with a half-smile. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying asked with a smile, "If Yueqing encounters any problems as her brother-in-law, will you help?" Of course. Of course I'll help." After saying that, Chunshi suddenly laughed, and then carried Qin Ruoying up by the waist. This sudden action immediately shocked Qin Ruoying. She quickly patted his arm and said, "Hey, what are you doing? Put me down. Let's go. Lady boss, let's open for business." Chunshi carried Qin Ruoying by the waist, Qin Ruoying carried the little fellow, and the little fellow carried the big cat. Chapter 146. The business of the tea house was not good today, and there were no customers in the morning. The little fellow was lying on the bar, playing with the marbles that the brothers gave her. It was really boring to play marbles alone. After playing for a while, the little fellow felt a little bored, so she looked up and kept asking Chunshi when the two little brothers from yesterday would come. The old man just said that they would come, but Chunshi did not know when they would come. Seeing that the little fellow was about to explode, the couple thought about it, and simply took her to the corner yesterday, and then squatted on the ground to play marbles with her. For marbles, a family of 3. Seeing that her parents were willing to play with her, the little fellow immediately became happy. Playing marbles was actually very similar to playing billiards, and they both required certain skills. Chunshi playing marbles was no different from opening a plug-in. In order to let the little fellow play to her heart's content, he had to deliberately miss every time. The little fellow learned the professional posture that the twins taught her, and after a tireless effort, she finally hit Chunshi's marbles. "Papa. I won. I won." After grabbing the marbles in front of Chunshi, the little fellow excitedly giggled at Chunshi. "Nian is so good. Do you still want to play?" "Yes." As if afraid that her father would not play with her, the little fellow quickly handed the marbles to Chunshi. Chunshi took the marbles, put them back on the ground, and then said to her with a smile, Nian, Papa doesn't know how to play. You have to give in to Papa a little." "Okay. I will give in to Papa." The little fellow nodded again and again like a chicken pecking rice. But after restarting the game, her luck was off the charts, so she hit Chunshi's marble right away. "Oh Nian, you are getting better and better. Papa is so stupid. I won again." The couple squatted beside the little fellow, looking at their daughter's flushed face because of too much excitement. They could not help but reach out and pinch her little face. "Annoying. Papa is annoying. Mama is so annoying." The little fellow twisted her body to avoid the attack, which made Chunshi and Qin Ruoying laugh out loud. With the company of his parents, the boring morning passed quickly. The 3 of them had just finished lunch when the door of the tea house was pushed open. The old man came as promised. Traveling with him was naturally the twin brother that the little fellow had been looking forward to for a long time. After the short interaction yesterday, the 3 little guys had cultivated a deep enough friendship. So when the 2 brothers walked into the tea house, they immediately looked around for the little fellow. "Sister, we're here." After seeing the little fellow, the 2 brothers hurriedly ran out and surrounded her. Then, as if he was presenting a treasure, the elder brother took out a small car from his pocket and said to the little fellow, "Sister, look. I brought you something good." After he finished speaking, he laid on the ground and slowly pulled the trolley back. When he let go of his hand, the cart immediately moved forward. The little fellow had never played with this kind of toy before, so she immediately ran over and picked up the cart from the ground to study it. Seeing this, the younger brother grabbed the cart from the little fellow's hand and stuffed his kaleidoscope into the little fellow's hand. "Sister, look at this. This is fun." Seeing this, the elder brother immediately became unhappy. He quickly grabbed the cart back from his younger brother and said to him with dissatisfaction, "My cart is fun." As he spoke, he wanted to put the cart back into the little fellow's hand. Seeing this, the younger brother was not to be outdone and shouted to his elder brother, "The kaleidoscope is fun. The cart is fun. The kaleidoscope is fun." The little fellow held the kaleidoscope in one hand and the cart in the other. She foolishly watched the 2 brothers quarrel in front of her. Looking at the situation, if they were allowed to quarrel a few more words, They would probably fight. Qin Ruoying had no choice but to step forward to stop them, and then said to the little fellow, "Nian Nian, don't you want to play marbles? Let your elder brothers play with you." With Qin Ruoying's mediation, the two brothers put down their dispute, squatted on the ground with the little fellow, and played the marbles that they didn't enjoy yesterday. After Chun-Shi made a cup of tea for the old man, he played Go with him again. Because of the old man's face, Chun-Shi held back a few moves, and finally lost by 3 pieces. The old man won with difficulty, but because of this he stopped looking down on him. He just wanted to play casually before, but he didn't expect that the tea house owner was really a master at such a young age. He actually had to use all his strength to win by chance. The two of them chatted while playing Go. Through chatting, they learned that the old man's surname was Gu, and he was already 65 years old this year. He lived in Binhai Alley, which was less than 200 meters away from Dongming Alley. The twins' surname was Xia, but the old man's surname was Gu. Obviously, he was their grandfather. Chun-Shi casually asked about the old man's family affairs, but he didn't expect the old man to shake his head after listening. He couldn't help but sigh. I don't want to talk about these things." Seeing this, Chun-Shi didn't ask more. The two of them continued to play Go. This game of Go was only interesting when the opponent was a match. If the opponent was too strong or too weak, it would be boring after 2 games. Chun-Shi's level was so much higher than the old man's that when he let the old man kill his dragon, the old man didn't notice anything strange. Instead, he proudly said that Chun-Shi was inexperienced. Chun-Shi nodded with a smile, and then invited the old man to play another game. Recently, it had been a bit gloomy. Although it didn't snow, the sun didn't come out much. Today was the worst day in history, but at the same time, it was also the happiest day for the little girl. The heater in the tea house was on full blast. Chun-Shi and the old man played Go leisurely, while the 3 little guys were chattering nonstop. Qin Ruoying put on light music, then sat on the sofa next to them and quietly read a book. Perhaps they were tired from playing marbles, so the 3 little guys sat on the sofa to rest. Then the older brother came up with a new trick: flipping flower rope. The 2 brothers probably played it at home, so after Qin Ruoying helped them find a rope, the 2 brothers immediately showed it to the little girl. The older brother first tied the rope into a noose, then flipped out a square cross with his fingers. When the younger brother saw this, he immediately reached over. After flipping it a few times, the noose was in his hand. Then, a double cross pattern appeared on the younger brother's hand. At first, the little girl didn't think it was anything strange. But when she saw the younger brother casually flip and create a new pattern, her interest was finally aroused. The older brother was not to be outdone. After glancing at the double cross on the younger brother's hand, he put his thumb through it, and with a hook of his little finger, a mosquito net suddenly appeared from his hand. Amazing! The little girl stared with her eyes wide open. She didn't even dare to blink her eyes at their performance. So she immediately looked at the brothers and said with some expectation, "Can you teach me?" Hearing this, the older brother immediately took back his hand, took the rope, and handed it to the little girl. "Sister, come, I'll teach you." However, before the little girl reached out to take it, the younger brother suddenly snatched the rope from the older brother's hand, then held the rope and said to the little girl, "Sister, don't let him teach you. I'll teach you. Give it to me. I'll teach you. No. I'll teach you. I'll teach you. I'll teach you." Seeing this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help shaking her head and laughing. Chapter 147. Gu Lao was a retired man, and his only job now was to take care of his grandchildren. The 2 brothers seemed to be very well behaved now, but in fact, they were much more naughty than Nian Nian. If the 2 brothers stayed in one place for a long time, there would probably be footprints on the ceiling. No matter where they went, the 2 brothers were together, so they were much bolder than the average child. If it weren't for the little girl in the tea house, they probably wouldn't have been able to sit still, and would have clamored to go out and play. Gu Lao was in good health, but taking care of these 2 naughty boys usually tired him out. Today, it was rare that the 2 brothers didn't bother him, so Gu Lao was naturally happy to be free. The three of them sat in the tea house for the whole afternoon. Chun-Shi patiently played Go with the old man. He controlled his level very well, and after a few games his record became 2 wins and 3 losses. Such a well-matched match also thoroughly aroused the old man's competitive spirit, and he became more and more focused when playing Go. 4:20 in the afternoon. Not long after the 6th game started, Chun-Shi's phone suddenly rang. He took out his phone and found that the caller was Ning Chiotong, who he hadn't contacted for a long time. Since Chun-Shi hung up on Ning Zhonghua last time, the father and daughter of the Ning family didn't bother him again. Ning Chiotong's sudden call probably meant that she needed his help with something again. After thinking for a while, Chun-Shi smiled apologetically at Gu Lao, and then picked up the phone. "Hello. Mr. Chun? It's me, Ning Chiotong." As soon as he picked up the phone, Chun-Shi heard a little nervousness in Ning Chiotong's tone. The reason why Ning Zhonggua's attitude was so bad when he talked to him last time was because he couldn't find any clues about Ying at that time, which caused him to be in a bad mood. Now that he found his wife, and the family lived happily together, Chun-Shi naturally returned to his previous harmless appearance. Come to think of it, the father and daughter of the Ning family had helped him a lot in the past, although most of it was a combination of interests. However, they were sensible and knew when to advance and retreat. So Chun-Shi didn't mind continuing to maintain a relationship with them. Thus he smiled and asked, "It's me. What's the matter?" After confirming that Chun-Shi was not very resistant to her, Ning Chiotong immediately said excitedly, "Mr. Chun, can you save my father?" What happened to your father?" "He was kidnapped." "What happened?" "Dad didn't come home yesterday, and I couldn't get through to him on the phone. I thought he had something important to do, so I didn't look for him. I didn't expect to suddenly receive a call from the kidnappers this morning." "Did you call the police?" After seeing the tip of the iceberg of Chun-Shi's strength, Ning Zhonghua had already made up his mind. No matter what, he would not say anything about Chun-Shi. Instead, he insisted that the hidden expert who could refine the miracle pill had already passed away. Ning Chiotong also knew about Chun-Shi's existence. However, because of Ning Zhonggua's warning, she hesitated for a long time before finally plucking up the courage to call Chun-Shi. The kidnappers only wanted the pill and not the money. However, there were no more pills. Could it be that she had to use a fake pill in exchange for her father's life? What if the other party saw through it? This was a serious matter. Ning Chiotong did not dare to take the risk, so she thought of looking for Chun-Shi. Fortunately, Chun-Shi was much easier to deal with compared to the kidnappers. After getting Chun-Shi's permission, Ning Chiotong hurriedly rushed to the Kongju district, ready to exchange the pill for Ning Zhonggua's life. It was just a simplified version of the energy pill. Chun-Shi could have as many as he wanted, so he did not care much. Old Ning's performance this time was not bad. Those few pills were his reward. As for the kidnappers, Chun-Shi was not the police. Why would he care so much? Ning Zhonghua was a famous business tycoon in Zhonghai. Since he was kidnapped, the Zhonghai police would naturally do their best to ensure his safety. Chapter 148. Gu Lao was a very particular person. For the past 2 days he would take the twins to the tea house after lunch every day. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Gu Lao would refuse Chun-Shi's dinner invitation, and then take the reluctant twins home for dinner. A cup of vegetarian tea a day was only 20 yuan. Chun-Shi didn't accept it, but he insisted on giving it. He always said that it was a different matter. On this day, when Gu Lao took the twins to the tea house again, he suddenly found that there was a children's playground in the tea house. It turned out that the couple saw that the 3 little guys would spend most of their time lying on the ground, so after some discussion, they simply removed the row of booths on the left side of the bar. The empty space was about 7 or 8 square meters. Chun-Shi first circled the area with a plastic fence, and then covered it with colorful children's climbing mats. The twins often brought some small toys for the little guy these 2 days, which opened the little guy's eyes, but also gave her the idea of wanting her parents to buy her toys. Chun-Shi suddenly realized that he had not bought any toys for Nian Nian since he came back for so long. So he discussed with Qin Ruoying to buy a lot of things in Jingdong. Within the third ring road of Shangjing, the Jingdong delivery would arrive the next morning. Chunxi bought a set of Barbie dolls for the little guy and 2 or 3 sets of accessories for her. Fantasy wardrobes, villas, castles, holiday homes, everything was available. Maybe Nian Nian had a talent for music? A children's electronic organ was needed. Maybe Nian Nian had a talent for painting? Children's paintbrushes, crayons, watercolors, and a painting kit were needed. Nian Nian lacked companionship, so a children's intelligent robot toy was needed. There was also a set of Lego bricks, puzzle toys, good stuff. The couple was addicted to buying. You choose one, I choose one. When Qin Ruoying came back to her senses, the settlement price of the shopping cart had reached more than 8,000 yuan. This was not good. How many toys to buy for the child was a very particular thing. After research by scholars at the University of Virginia, they found that the best number of toys to buy for the child was 5. If there are less than 5 toys, children may feel inferior. But if there were more than 5, not only would the toys not be played enough, but it would also limit the child's creativity. It was also proven that the more toys there were at home, the lower the frequency of children playing with them. Too many toys would distract a child's attention, and it was easy for the child to develop the bad habit of 3-minute enthusiasm. On the other hand, if the number of toys was small, the child would get tired of playing with them. At the same time, if they couldn't get new toys, the bored child would create new ways to play. Holding the cell phone, she froze in place. At this time, after Chunxi excused himself from Gulao, he got up and went to the bar. He had already heard the conversation between the father and daughter. He patted Qin Ruoying's back gently, indicating that she should not worry. Chunxi took the phone from Qin Ruoying and asked Qin Yongyan, "Where is she now?" "In Dianzhou. I'll be right there." "Okay." Hearing Chunxi's words, Qin Yongyan immediately felt relieved. After telling Chunxi the specific location, he hung up the phone. Chunxi was very clear about his sister-in-law's strength. When she left a few days ago, she had successfully broken through the Alcade state. But unexpectedly, she was lucky enough to survive because of this. The reason why martial arts declined was that human society had completely entered the era of firearms. Even a child as old as Nian Nian could easily kill a martial arts master who had practiced martial arts for many years with a gun. The bullet speed of a sniper rifle was generally about 900 meters per second, and the speed of sound was only 340 meters per second. This speed was 2.5 times faster than the speed of sound. If Qin Wanqing was still in the transforming strength stage, she wouldn't have been able to dodge this fatal shot. She was indeed lucky. Chapter 149. Something had happened to Qin Xueqing, but it was Qin Yongyan who had called to inform them. In other words, Qin Xueqing was probably not out of danger yet. Qin Ruoying only had one sister. Although Qin Xueqing especially liked to compete with her when she was young, it was just a childish tantrum. It was obviously impossible to say that the two sisters had no feelings for each other. Qin Xueqing actually cared about her sister very much, just like how Qin Ruoying cared about her. It was just that she always appeared cold and aloof. Qin Ruoying was not very sure what would happen if she was shot in the arm by a sniper rifle. But Qin Yongyan had already said on the phone that one of Qinqing's hands was crippled. She was originally a martial arts fanatic. If one of her hands was really crippled, what kind of blow would it be to her? The more Qin Ruoying thought about it, the more afraid she became. She could not help but hold Chunxi's hand tightly, looking a little frightened. Seeing this, Chunxi gently hugged her into his arms and comforted her softly. "Don't be afraid, I'm here." Qin Ruoying gently leaned her head on Chunxi's chest. After adjusting her emotions, she said softly, "She go and see Qinqing." "Okay." Chunxi nodded, then lowered his head and left a kiss on Qin Ruoying's lips. Perhaps because Chunxi was by her side, Qin Ruoying could not help but feel a little more relaxed after their lips parted. The couple turned their heads to the left side of the bar. The 3 little guys were sitting on the climbing mat, with a pile of Lego blocks in front of each of them. They were comparing whose block castle looked better. Nian, Daddy has to go out for a while. I'll be back soon. Be good at home and listen to Mommy, okay? Chunxi's tone was full of negotiation because he was worried that the little guy would suddenly flip out. However, the little fellow's reaction was somewhat out of Chunxi's expectations. She looked up at Chunxi. After thinking for a while, the little girl suddenly grinned and said, "Goodbye, Papa. I'll wait for you at home." As she spoke, she waved her hand at Chunxi. At this moment, the twins waved at Chunxi and shouted, "Goodbye, Uncle." Seeing this, Chunxi was stunned for a moment. Then he patted the heads of the three little guys one by one. The little fellow suddenly stopped clinging to him. It probably had something to do with these two brothers. Chunxi didn't know that the two brothers were brought up by Gu Lao. Their parents were very busy with work, so they rarely accompanied them when they were young. After the brothers explained their situation to the little fellow finally understood how happy she was now. Therefore, when Chunxi proposed to go out, Nian was very generous. Because she now understood that adults need to go out to work, so they can't be with their children all day. The little fellow was very generous, which relieved Chunxi of his worries. The main targets of this type of rifle were armored vehicles, airplanes, and fortifications. Its advantages were its long range, high power, and high accuracy. Its disadvantages were that there was usually only one bullet in the magazine, and it took a long time to reload. If one was directly hit by this type of rifle, if one was lucky, it might only break in two. But if one was unlucky, it might be all over the place. There was no way to collect the corpse. Qin Xueqing's arm was broken on the spot. Fortunately, she was not an ordinary person. Otherwise, when her entire arm was broken, her shoulder blade might be pulled and a part of her body would be forcibly torn off. This was the true power of modern weapons. Because of excessive blood loss, Qin Xueqing was still in a coma. A group of people stood outside her ward. They had been waiting here for a whole day and night, but Qin Xueqing still did not wake up. A man who looked to be in his 30s stood up and glanced at Qin Wanqing, who was lying on the hospital bed through the glass window. He seemed to have made a decision as he turned around and walked out with an ashen face. "Third brother. Stop. Where are you going?" Before the man called third brother could take 2 steps, he was pulled back by his companion behind him. He did not say a word and wanted to shake off his companion, but his companion grabbed his arm tightly and did not allow him to leave. The two of them started arguing. The people around them hurriedly surrounded them and tried to persuade them to calm down. While they were arguing, the elevator door opened with a ding sound. A man slowly walked out of the elevator. He stood in the corridor and looked around. After confirming the room number, he walked directly to the senior official's ward where they were. Third brother was in a fit of anger. When he saw that the man was being so rude, he immediately reached out his hand to stop him. "Stop. Who the F***ck are you? Do you know where this place is?" The man glanced at him, then pointed to the ward behind him and asked, "Is Qin Xueqing here? Who the F***ck are you?" Third brother's attitude was very bad, so the man did not want to talk to him. After glancing at him indifferently, he wanted to walk past him and go straight to the ward. Third brother was instantly furious. He reached out his hand to drag the man back. However, before his hand could touch the man's clothes, a huge force slammed him against the wall. This was the Chengdu Military Region's Spring City General Hospital. No matter how bold those Nanyang monkeys were, it was unlikely that they would come here to cause trouble. The reason why OL3 stopped Chunxi from entering was because he was in a bad mood. He wanted to vent his anger on someone, but he did not expect to bump into an iron plate. At this time, Chunxi was already standing next to Qin Xueqing. He lifted a corner of Qin Xueqing's blanket and looked at her empty sleeve with a frown. Then he gently placed his right hand on Qin Xueqing's forehead. 3 seconds later, Chunxi slowly withdrew his right hand, and Qin Xueqing slowly woke up. "The section chief is awake." "Damn. That's awesome. Let's go in and have a look." They pushed and shoved outside the door, but they found that they could not get in. The door seemed to be locked from the inside. Qin Xueqing's head shook left and right, followed by a painful groan. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly. Perhaps it was because the light was too dazzling, so Qin Xueqing frowned and took a while to adjust to it. Then she slowly opened her eyes. After all, she was a great master in the gang state, and her body was much stronger than ordinary people. After a short period of adjustment, Qin Xueqing used her left hand to support herself to sit up. The ward was filled with the faint smell of disinfectant. This was the 13th floor, and the bright morning sun shone into the room through the window. In a trance, Qin Xueqing vaguely remembered that she had a very long dream. That dream was too long. So when she woke up, she felt as if she had gone from a cold winter full of snow to a warm spring full of the fragrance of flowers. Sensing that there was someone beside her, Qin Xueqing turned to look at the figure, and was slightly stunned. After a long while, she asked in a hoarse voice, "Why are you here? Where is this?" "Spring City Military Hospital." "Hospital?" Qin Xueqing muttered. Immediately after, she seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly turned her head to look at her right arm. Sure enough, the empty sleeve was swaying slightly. The memory before she fainted flashed in her mind like a slideshow. She remembered. She, who had already stepped into the gang state, was like a real god in front of those Nanyang monkeys, and they were forced to retreat. She even remembered the despair on those Nanyang people's faces. The leader of those Nanyang people was also a martial arts master. When she fought with them, they pretended to be defeated and lured her to chase after them. As a martial artist, Qin Xueqing had her own confidence and pride. So she subconsciously thought that every martial arts master should have their own pride. She really didn't expect that the other party had already arranged a sniper, and was just waiting for her to take the bait. Qin Xueqing's hard work during this period of time was not wasted. All of them were highly skilled in martial arts and were armed with heavy weapons. Due to various considerations, the local police did not dare to obstruct them. They set up checkpoints along the way, but they let them pass. From East China to the border of South China, it was more than 2,000 kilometers. This group of people only took one day and one night to complete the entire journey. This could already be considered a terrorist activity. In a fit of anger, the Wu Lian leader ordered the action team to set up layers of defense on the border of Guizhou with the Border Defense Army. Even if the hostages were hurt, it was absolutely impossible to let them leave Huaxia unscathed. Qin Xueqing led the team to intercept them in Guizhou. After a short exchange with that group of people, they retreated after one strike and turned to jump into Shirwan Mountains. Shirwan Mountains was located in the southern part of Guizhou. It faced the sea and was adjacent to Yuebei. The mountains were filled with towering trees, and there were few roads and few people. Qin Xueqing originally thought that they would find an opportunity to cross the border from Shirwan Mountains and escape to Yuebei, so she launched a search operation in Shirwan Mountains. She did not know that this group of people did not intend to leave through Shirwan Mountains at all. Instead, they turned again and went directly to Dianzhou. With the obstruction of Shirwan Mountains, they successfully shook off the Border Defense Army. However, the weakest under Qin Xueqing's command was at the middle stage of concealing strength. How could she let them escape under her nose? Therefore, she immediately followed them and chased them all the way. Finally, on the border of Dianzhou, Qin Xueqing stopped this group of people again. This time, the other party finally started a direct confrontation with them. Qin Xueqing did not dare to use heavy weapons, but the other party was not polite at all. They carried rocket launchers on their shoulders, and only fired them in places where there were many people. They seemed to be escaping from the beginning to the end, but in fact, all of the Wu Lian's actions were within the expectations of this group of people. Their destination was Dianzhou. After Qin Xueqing was injured, the emergency department suddenly lost its backbone. Without the obstruction of the martial arts masters, this group of people rushed across the border. In the past, if they did not work for drug lords, they would have their hands and feet chopped off or even their lives. Times had changed. Now drug lords would give generous wages, so more and more flower farmers were attracted to work for them. In the off-season, flower farmers could even go down the mountain to the city to buy. For flower farmers, this was just a job to support their families. Qin Shihuiqing was a little surprised by the lax security here. Except for the 2 sentry posts, there was not a single soldier in sight. She did not know that now was not 20 years ago. The weapons and equipment of drug lords had been upgraded long ago. The rich ones even rented satellites to keep an eye on the troop movements of the surrounding countries. Even without satellites, radar was a necessary item. So the function of the sentry post was more like announcing the ownership of this territory to the outside world. Most people would not go to the nest of drug lords for no reason. After all, trespassing into a military base would at most be expelled, but trespassing into a drug lord's territory would cost one's life. Mayman was like a small town. There were several villages around the town, and the villages were surrounded by a sea of flowers. The two walked for a while. After passing through a sea of flowers, the terrain suddenly opened up, and the reinforced concrete building finally appeared in front of them. In front of them was the legendary town of Mayman. Qin Shihuiqing curiously looked at the layout of the town, and found that the place was completely arranged according to the plan of a military base. In the center of the base, there were 2 missile launchers, and several cannons were arranged on the roof next to them. A little further ahead, there was a helipad full of armed helicopters. On the right side of the town, there was a training ground, where hundreds of armed soldiers were being trained. Except for the lack of an airport runway, there was really everything here. Qin Shihuiqing was a little stunned, because her impression of drug lords was still in the movies. However, what she did not know was that the movies were all about the drug lords of Kunsa's time. Decades had passed, and even Huaxia's aircraft carrier had been launched. If the drug lords had not been upgraded, they would have been wiped out by the government long ago. How about we go back and think about it? It was true that her sister-in-law was arrogant, but she was definitely not stupid. No wonder the government had not shouted the slogan of encirclement and suppression of the Golden Triangle in recent years. It was because the fight would be terrible. In the past, the soldiers rushed with guns. 2 heavy machine guns could kill a regiment, and they could not take a step forward.